Man hasn't joined yet. Oh, Man's there. Okay, great. He hasn't put his camera on yet.
I'm muted. Hello, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I think it's time to start.
Yeah. Shall we start? Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to start. Shall we start, Asa?
So please start.
I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this, the fourth edition of the flagship conference of the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability, or 3CS as we call it, at Ashoka University. My name is Gautam Menon, and I direct the center along with Ian Stewart, who's the co-director. 3CS is based in Ashoka University, and of course, the core aim of a liberal education is to create and nurture citizens who are engaged as well as responsible. We know now that climate change will lead to increased food and water insecurity, the large-scale displacement of populations as sea levels rise, a loss of biodiversity, more disease spillovers, as well as larger numbers of extreme climate events. And developing more sustainable lifestyles, or concentrating on where we can make what we do more sustainable, is key to mitigating and adapting to what seems inevitable in the near future. So the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability at Ashoka was created to address precisely such questions. What we want to show, what we would like to do, is to show how truly interdisciplinary academic engagement and social engagement that combines the interests of faculty members across multiple departments, then in our case, can address these questions in very different ways. 3CS supports a number of programs at the university in areas as diverse as climate change economics, climate change journalism, One Health, sustainability, agricultural river systems, and ways of outreach that are novel and unusual and provoke people to think about questions such as these. We also pay special attention to engaging students with questions of sustainability. And the Live Green campus, the Live Green initiative on campus is one such initiative. So welcome to this two-day program, split over 2 days between 6 and 9 India time. The first day will address questions in urban ecology, while the second will address questions in climate change and ecology more broadly. Let me now hand you over to Professor Amita Bhaviskar, who will coordinate today's session, which is called More Than Human, Cities, Animal Ecologies. Amita?
Thank you, Gautam. And welcome everyone to the first day of the Healing Earth conference. And in particular, this session on urban animals. In his book, Invisible Cities, Italo Calvino describes Esmeralda, the fabulous city of water where canals and streets span and intersect each other, such that the ways open to each passerby are never two, but many. Esmeralda's inhabitants include, and I quote, cats, thieves, and illicit lovers who move along higher discontinued ways, dropping from a rooftop to a balcony, following gutterings with acrobat steps. Below, the rats run in the darkness of sewers, one behind the other's tail. A map of Esmeralda should include, marked in different colored inks, all these routes, solid and liquid, evident and hidden. It is more difficult to fix on the map the routes of the swallows, who cut the air over the roofs dropping long, invisible parabolas with their still wings, darting to gulp a mosquito, spiraling upward, grazing a pinnacle, dominating from every point of their airy paths, all the points of the city. Calvino's words came to my mind as I just watched Shonak Sen's All That Breathes, a luminous and moving portrait of how the human and the more than human come together in cities. When we think of cities, the first images that come to mind are of people and of their artifacts, crowds and cars and buildings. Yet cities are also animated by the presence of non-human animals, wild, feral, and domesticated. Dogs, pigeons, pigs, rats, kites, and countless others share our habitat and make it their own. So when humans and other animals co-produce their environment, what unexpected encounters and outcomes do we find? How do these relationships survive and flourish in the face of efforts to control the social and spatial order of cities? And how do these relationships illuminate something vital, yet neglected, in the nature of cities? And most important, what do we do with this knowledge? Deep inequalities mark our cities' wealth and waste, heartbreaking squalor and backbreaking work, violence, hatred, and dull resentment simmer and boil. And yet, cities are also places of hope and struggle, of magnificent achievement against all odds, of caring and compassion. And if all these things too are possible, where do we find inspiration and the resources for action? It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers today, Man Barua, Sneha Gudgutia, and Anne Rademacher, all scholars whose dedicated research on the ground has opened up our understanding of urban ecologies, their entanglements, their invisible life. And if we have a fuller and deeper appreciation of cities, it is thanks to them. Later in the session at 8 o'clock, we will talk to Nadeem Shehzad and Mohammed Saud, whose amazing work we just saw with All That Breathes, rescuing birds of prey in the city of Delhi. But let me first introduce you to the speakers who will be presenting just now. We have Man Barua, who is a geographer, or rather he's in the Department of Geography, but Man is many things. He started off as an ecologist studying elephants in Assam. And from that beginning, and quite unusually, his work has stayed true to its ecological origins, but he is also engaged with critical theory in the social sciences, paying great attention to the material and the ideological. And you can see that in his book that came out last year, Lively Cities, Reconceptualizing Urban Ecology. Man is also, this is not completely relevant here, but I can't not say it. He's also a gifted painter whose watercolors of birds are a delight to see. Following Man, we will have a talk by Sneha Gudgutia at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. I first met Sneha when she just started her fieldwork in Delhi, and I was just blown away by the quality of her research. It's not easy to study something that's stigmatized and half hidden, the way pig rearing and pig slaughter is in Indian cities. And it requires enormous sensitivity, skill, ingenuity, and doggedness to do it well. So welcome, Sneha. I'm really looking forward to hearing you. And to discuss these two papers, which the speakers will present for half an hour each, we have Anne Rademacher from New York University. Anne has worked on many different things with great insight. Her earliest work was on urban rivers and water governance in the city of Kathmandu, a book called Raining the River. She then worked on to look at another set of urban ecological themes in her book Building Green, which is about the ways in which architects, planners, and builders think about what building sustainably can mean in the urban context, in particular Mumbai. And we're especially excited to have Anne here because her new project is on vultures. As you know, vulture populations plummeted across South Asia. They're coming back in some ways, but vultures perhaps have a cultural importance in India like nowhere else. So, and we know these are early days, but we look forward to having you back to share some of that work with us soon. That is my introduction, and I now request Man Barua to please present his work on urban metabolism. His paper is called The Metropolis and Metabolic Life.
Thank you so much, Amita, for that very generous and kind invitation. And Sneha and Anne, it's really lovely to be in a panel with you all. I'd like to share my PowerPoint. If just please give me a minute. I'm going to do share screen. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me and see the screen? Right. Okay. So let me start this talk by taking you to Guwahati, a city in Northeast India, where I've been conducting work for a book that's provisionally titled The Metropolis and Metabolic Life. And my specific interest today is on chicken keeping, which is a fairly common practice in parts of the city, with birds being reared by resident Muslim and Boro communities, often in erstwhile villages that have now become urbanized. And most of these birds that you see in the city are free-ranging. Following some of these birds, as they move through the city, reveals urban microspaces, foraging for instance, in an incomplete building, then flying onto land that has not yet been built upon, where urban gardening and a small paper waste recycling business takes place. These sorts of galine movements draw attention to different kinds of urban ground: loam and silt mixed with household garbage, earth compacted with pieces of broken concrete from a city under continual construction. The birds foraging sutures different urban fragments to compose what one could call an urban barnyard, one that emerges without a model, but yet also without mere chance. This foraging, one could argue, is a form of metabolic dwelling, an encounter with the world through the very gustatory practice of eating. And as the bird picks away at little grains of rice and it makes its ways through a drain where there's kitchen waste, foraging in these urban residues, one could argue that the city moves through the body as much as the body moves through the city. But urban poultry keeping is only one part of this wider story. This project on the metropolis and metabolic life also looks at a suite of other creatures. And in fact, resonating with Anne's work, I've been doing some field work on vultures in India, in Guwahati, but also storks. But when we come to the matter of chickens, these birds kept in urban barnyards is only one part of the story. The mass production of broilers that you can see in this image here has, over the last few decades, kind of entirely transformed urban cuisine, and with it, agricultural practices across much of India. Chicken, one could argue, are now the world's most numerous birds. 66 billion broilers are slaughtered globally every year. This therefore prompts asking questions, I think, which relates to the wider themes of the conference about urban life after the industrialization of biology, and about thinking of the city as a site of industrial effluent and industrialized eating. Many of the birds which are consumed in the city of Guwahati involves a trade in live birds. The production and distribution of broilers, as I will also later show in this talk, entails an incessant traffic between the city and the countryside, not only of the broiler and of birds, but of an entourage of materials, including formulated feed, metabolites, and veterinary drugs. So the title of this talk, The Metropolis and Metabolic Life, resonates with an essay written by the sociologist George Simmel called The Metropolis and Mental Life. My argument, however, cannot be more different from Simmel's, for whom the city was a site where life was marked by forms of detachment. As we see in the instance of this broiler or this chicken moving through the city, and the vistas that it opens up regarding body and environment, distance and proximity, space and time, one could argue it renders borders quarantining the human from the other than human as untenable. A visceral politics of the city, no doubt fractured along highly uneven social fault lines, comes to the fore. A metabolic account, however, is a departure from ongoing efforts to animate the urban and to interrogate the cities from the perspective of non-human life. And here, by this, I'm also kind of referring to the work I've been doing earlier, which Amita mentioned, was sort of published in the form of a book called Lively Cities. This work on kind of metabolism tries to take this into slightly different ground. It's marked by it is sort of marked by a departure. And there are three basic currents that I would argue that kind of metabolism pushes us towards, and they form the basis of my talk. First, I would argue, and contrary to my own work as well, much of the work in multi-species studies and what's come to be known as modern human geography are steeped in a model of thought. The animal becomes a perceiving and sentient subject. On the other hand, eating, being eaten, and sort of being discarded as waste are kind of relegated, while subjectivity and thinking are elevated. In lieu, however, one could ask, what does a modern human sociality of the city look like if we move towards a model of eating and therefore of metabolism rather than a model of thought? Second, a model of thought that structures ways in which the city and its built form is repurposed by non-humans, whether these ecologies coalesce as feral, as cultivated, or wild, has certain limitations, which I would like to kind of argue through the next 20 minutes or so. Metabolism, I would say, on the other hand, reconfigures the body as a locus in a field of transformations and troubles distinctions between subject and environment. So think, for example, or think of the example of the chicken moving through Guwahati, or should we say the city of Guwahati moving through the chicken. Third, metabolism folds the city and the countryside, the in here from the and the over there into one another. And I think this becomes extremely important if we are to kind of go beyond just looking at the city as the site of urbanization. If a lot of work in multi-species studies uses the urban as a kind of backdrop or as a placeholder for a set of dyadic human-animal or human-plant relations, then metabolism and a metabolic ethnography reworks the animal and an environment of industrial effluent and of industrial eating into an urban question. But before going further, I just want to kind of clarify briefly what do I mean by metabolism and the ways in which I invoke the term. So first, kind of drawing from a tradition of scholarship within science and technology studies and the histories of science, I understand metabolism as a biochemical process through which organisms use and convert nutrients from one form to another, exemplified, for instance, in the work of the historian of science, Hannah Landecker. It is a concern, I would say, with life in the aftermath of industrialization, where both body and surrounds are not natural, but one of industrial effluent and industrialized eating. Second, it takes from political economy's discussion of metabolism as the process through which labor transforms materials into commodities or things, which sets up a particular circulatory dynamic or space structured by uneven social relations of power, whether these are of capital, gender, class, or caste. But it is important, I would argue, to keep in mind that political economy and urban political ecologies, invocation of metabolism through Marx's use of the 19th century term stoffwechsel is rather different from the ways in which contemporary science understands metabolism. So Marx, as many of you will be aware, drew upon this 19th century idea of Stoffwechsel from the agricultural chemist Justus von Liebig and Jacob Mohlschott, but it's not necessarily the same kind of biochemistry of metabolism that is invoked now. In fact, it's only in the 1970s translations of Capital that the term Stoffwechsel is sort of replaced with metabolism in the English translation. And therefore, one could argue that, the versions of metabolism that many Marxist scholars read back onto Marx is not the same as the ways in which metabolism is understood when one thinks of the industrialization of life. But nonetheless, I would still argue that a conversation between these two invocations of metabolism can be productive and can therefore further a project of writing the urban otherwise. So therefore, to animate, or one could say metabolize the urban, let me turn to Guwahati again. As in many cities of the global south, rearing chickens is common practice in Guwahati. Many, especially those from the resident Muslim community, do so as a hobby, whilst for others, it becomes a means of kind of supplementing income and more broadly, a part of social reproduction. Breeds kept, as a state veterinary officer tells me, are usually crosses between the white leghorn and the Rhode Island red. And these breeds are commonly referred to as local or local to distinguish it from the industrial broiler. Local birds do not need dana or feed, says Arif, an urban poultry keeper who has 3 laying hens. They forage on their own and feed on whatever they get, be it insects, grains of rice from shops and go-downs or warehouses. Here, in a seminal work on animals in animal life in cities, the labor of herding is deflected onto the birds themselves. Oh, sorry, there's been a power cut, an infrastructural glitch, but I will carry on. Here, so local, therefore one could argue, is a vernacular iteration of the metabolic. The English word local, derived from the term locus or place, is given an Assamese twist. The term indexes both place and rootedness, often used by residents to index belonging, but also a territorialization of space. At the same time, it's a reference to a particular mode of rearing chickens that is not industrial. In fact, is a kind of counterpoint to the industrial. As Arif's laying hen moves through their mohalla or neighborhood, one begins to see the city at a number of different scales. The hen first pecks on some grains of rice strewn by Arif and his wife Fatima. The white grains of rice are a stark contrast to the compact soil, which has sand and cement from construction work. A broken brick, strings from a bag of cement, and saplings of adiantum, a bryophyte, complete what one could call an urban fragment. Fragments, as the geographer Colin McFarlane has argued, generates insights on what it means to be urban. Fragments, in his words, are not just things but processes. They're not only material entities, but a form of expression or a type of knowledge. In this instance, so in this instance, one could argue that maybe it's Galine knowledge through which these sort of fragments are formed. The bird then goes down in a narrow space with a rusting bicycle and an old car tire, making its ways into what seems to be a dead end. Then a quick turn, opening out onto a drain where the hen stands on a discarded corrugated iron sheet jutting out from the gutter. The stench of the drain is in no way intense, and only the occasional smell of fermenting rice hits the nostrils. After a while, she flies out through an opening. Suddenly, one witnesses a clearing at the back, a vacant plot of land where saccharum grass is growing, perhaps because riverine sand was brought for construction. This patch is a remnant of the hollows that once constituted this locality. The bird's metabolic geography brings microspaces of the city into view, a city that one could call Baroque. A world with irregular passages, narrowing in some places, widening in others, with twists and turns pleated into one another. Urban form becomes fractal, appearing at some scales and looking completely different at others. And one could argue it is in these sort of fragments that the uncanny appears. a discarded newspaper article on Paul McCartney suddenly appears amidst this rubbish. The hens foraging, one could argue, kind of troubles distinctions between body and environment. And as I've highlighted earlier, the city moves to this chicken as it begins to ingest its surrounds. Although this observation might seem trivial, it has implications for how one articulates the production of urban space. The further wider salience of this argument is the temporal dimension that metabolism introduces. What we witness is not just where is the urban environment, but when. In a similar vein, a focus on metabolism shows that what is at stake is not only what is an urban animal, but when. Metabolism, one could argue, prompts us to look beyond species worlds to assemblages. And at the same time, it fosters a reading of the urban that is machinic, constituted by meshworked entities in the process of coming into being and always incomplete. So adjacent to Arif's home is the Adabari market, which has become an urban cluster of sorts, selling all kinds of materials for the rearing of broiler chickens. The market came up in the area about 30 years ago. Adabari was in the outskirts that farmers from rural hinterlands could easily access without having to worry about traffic control measures in more central business districts of Guwahati. Starting with a handful of shops, the market has grown over time, with erstwhile urban villagers constructing buildings and godowns or warehouses to give out on rent. This is reflective of what others have called a plotting urbanism, ordinary in character, proceeding in a piecemeal fashion without any overarching planning. At the same time, such plotting results in and is conditioned by the emergence of logistical space, drawing attention to how metabolism becomes a distributed and scaled up activity. Adabari is a major locale for selling broiler feed formulations, which arrive from mills situated in emerging industrial zones built in marshlands outside Guwahati. Feed formulations are about scaling up, showing how expansion and speed up happens not just in the galine body, but in an assemblage through which production, but also absorption and digestion takes place. Nowadays, our feed produces a 2-kilogram bird in 30 days, says Amit, the manager of the plant. Better feed produces larger birds quicker. One key element of such feed is soy, which is practically a protein pill. As the stacks here show, soy to the mill comes from the Indian state of Maharashtra. And again, you see with the feed, there's a distributed geography that's kind of inhering in a particular site. Those are medicines. Anil points to a pile of sacks. Please do not take close-up photographs. The sacks contain methionine, an essential amino acid. Well over 1 million tons of synthetic methionine are produced worldwide annually, largely to fortify poultry feed. As a metabolite, methionine enables the conversion of soy and maize into animal biomass, thus enhancing the transformation of feed into protein. By fundamentally altering the availability of a historically limited material, the industry, one could argue, has bypassed long-evolved ecological processes and has generated a shift through the production of methionine in the ways in which sulfur is assimilated and moves up food chains. We do not look at our diets for ourselves, Anil, the manager continues, but for broilers we do. He then talks about the repercussions of industrial feed formulations. We end up eating soy because chicken eats soy, says Anil, in a vein resonating with the dictum, we are what we eat eats. Outlets in Adabari sell feed to poultry farmers, most of whom are located in the urban extensions, but also to butchers in the city. This is because, contra in European cities, the trade in chickens in India is largely of live birds. Chickens are provided feed in butchers' shops, as the birds are kept alive until the meat is sold to customers. Many nowadays, therefore, prefer selling broilers over these local chickens, which you can see in the image here. Okay, sorry. Which you can see in the image here, largely because the broiler doesn't lose weight when kept in cages. So although local chickens are 3 times as more expensive as meat, what happens is that butchers, lose money when they start selling local chicken because the birds rapidly lose weight in cages. Whereas in broilers, they're able to retain their weight because of the formulated feed that's given to the birds, and therefore there is less weight loss and therefore more profit. So one could argue, therefore, that the urban in the aftermath of industrialization is not only about speed. No doubt, the broiler gains weight quickly. No doubt, the broiler gains weight quickly, and that too on less feed, but the provisioning of formulated feed means that they also lose weight more slowly. That much of India's chicken market is based on the sale of live birds means that broilers become profitable to sell and not just produce. A turn to the metabolic, however, complicates relations between the urban and the rural, the near and the far. Take, for instance, the pathways of broilers as they move in and out of Guwahati. Eggs from industrial layer farms, many of which are located in South India, including Namakkal, which is kind of dubbed the egg capital of India, where about 1,100 poultry farms produce 60 million, which house about 60 million layer hens. So eggs from these sort of places come via train to Guwahati. These are then kind of transported to commercial hatcheries, many of which are situated in the urban extensions. One such hatchery processes about 60,000 eggs a week, with a hatching cycle taking about 21 days to complete. Staff in these hatcheries work non-stop, including on night shifts. My machines never stop, the owner of a hatchery tells me. When someone goes on leave, others have to fill in. No Sundays. The workers stay on site in a large room with a kitchen and a few beds. Hatcheries and scaling up thus reminds us about the continuous supply of labor, and this, as sort of Walter Rodney long observed, is the logic of the plantation. Hatcheries also work because of standardization. Here we see a nesting of scale and the linking of one technical system with another. These are, to use Susan Lay's STARS term, boring things that make scaling up possible. Hatched chicks then are brought back to the city, to markets like Adabari, where they are sold wholesale. Once again, the birds are shifted to poultry farms in rural areas, where they're reared by farmers through a system called vertical integration, a form of economic organization where companies provide farmers with chicks and feed and buy back ready-made birds or market-ready birds. This precarious form of outsourcing, where farmers provide land, labor, and infrastructure, has become the primary organizational form of the global poultry sector. A vital aspect to the scaling up and profitability here entails achieving what's called better feed conversion ratios, or the rate at which livestock transfigure feed into body mass. FCR, or feed conversion ratios, is a statistic that influences how vertical integration companies are organized. Lower FCR values translate into greater profit, and this has spurred not only the industrialization of the broiler, but also of its diet. Feed companies, therefore, continually kind of promote their products based on the low FCR values their feed is supposed to generate. And as this image shows, integration companies calculate feed conversion ratios for each farm. If the FCR comes down, the companies give us an incentive, says Orup, a chicken farmer in a village outside Guwahati. And farmers, of course, do all kinds of things to manipulate FCR and kind of sometimes sell off extra feed and so on and so forth, but that's another story. Market-ready birds are then transported back into the city where they're sold wholesale. These birds then end up in retail outlets, predominantly butchers, but also restaurants and the city's numerous street vendors. What one sees, therefore, is not a linear movement from the rural as the site of agrarian production to the urban as the site where consumption happens. Rather, the circulation of chickens continuously moves between the urban and the rural, or the urban extensions, generating all kinds of proximities in a topological vein. One can in fact think of the urban, therefore, as a space of intensity, which is forged by metabolic processes and the phenomena forming them. Metabolism, however, is not closed. It's not cyclical, although the imaginary of cycles is seductive and is often mobilized in the name of economic efficiency. Assemblages of broiler production also spur their own metabolic ecologies. Rats are a common occurrence in godowns or warehouses where formulated feed is stored. They become very big because of the high protein content of formulated feed, says Ismail, who owns a broiler feed and drugstore in Adabari. Ismail catches rats in his godown almost every day. And some of these animals also go into people's chicken coops and kill their birds, as many of the farmers in Adabari told me. Metabolism, therefore, one could argue, is not a closed loop, although it is often projected as cyclical, bringing forth an imaginary of economic efficiency. But the traffic between the urban and the rural does not stop with the market-ready birds arriving in the city. Offal from butchers' shops, body parts that were once chicken, is collected at night via arrangements that form an informal circular economy. It makes its ways to fisheries in Jagi Road, not far from Guwahati, where offal is offered as feed to carnivorous fish, such as the Pangasius and the Chinese pomfret. This process is not entirely legal, and the constitution of such circularity is contingent on several intermediaries and all kinds of informal arrangements. It is cheap feed, one fishery owner in Jagi Road tells me, but because it is not entirely legal, it takes several hours for the offal to reach here from Guwahati, even though the metro is not very far away. As a result, the offal decomposes and the quality is not great. Jagi Road's landscape is in fact undergoing a drastic alteration, with erstwhile paddy fields almost entirely replaced by tanks for intensive fish rearing. Besides roads and homes, you will only find fisheries here, says Akbar, reflecting on how the industrialization of metabolism has resulted in a transformation of the city's rural hinterlands. One could call this a process of metabolic urbanization, the quest to produce cheap fish, resulting in the transformation of the rural hinterlands, but also a process where the insides of a commodity, that is the broiler chicken, becomes its outsides, which then becomes the insides of yet another commodity, which is carnivorous fish, which is situated not here in the city, but out there in the rural extensions. Chicken, now ingested as fish, come back to the city. So this talk, in many ways, has gone round in ellipses. Chickens moving through cities, cities moving through chickens, birds traveling from the urban to the rural, out and back again. Feed becoming chickens, chickens becoming feed. So it's been an attempt, I would argue, to think about the urban from the metabolic, an attempt to kind of outline what Donna Haraway calls big enough stories, and also an attempt to tell larger stories alongside smaller ones. What matters in terms of method, of course, is where the cuts are made, which pathways are not followed further, and how a particular notion of the urban is configured through this iteration. So by means of a brief conclusion, I would like to make three broader points. First, I have asked, what if our theoretical repertoires for engaging with the urban were to take cues not from cognitive reflections about the world, but from metabolic engagements with the world? Here, the analytic of species and dyadic human-animal relations that has become the mainstay of much animal and multi-species studies becomes rather limiting. Instead, the urban is resituated in processes that are transversal, cutting across cell, body, infrastructure, and landscape. Second, metabolism enables writing uneven social relations back into the question of the living and material world, which has sometimes been sidestepped in the kind of fascination with vitalism and new materialism. We see how urban metabolism is underlined by the labors of the marginalized, whether these have to do with production, the institution of circular economies, or the management of waste. Third, metabolism folds and complicates scale. It is neither about the city as a bounded entity, nor does it have to do with extended urbanization alone. Rather, metabolic engagements with the world, recasting the urban as a lived achievement composed by relations of ingestion and egestion, assimilation and overflow, shows how the urban inheres relatedly, but also differentially in fragments and iterative pathways, neighborhoods and landscapes. Metabolism, in this sense, is baroque. The story of metabolism, however, cannot just be told through chicken. The wider project, as I'd mentioned up front, looks at a range of other processes. However, the wider salience of this argument and the kind of ethnography presented here is that it prompts another engagement with the urban, especially, I would say, in the aftermath of industrialization. It prompts engaging with urban living as it unfolds over a number of scales, shows up different bodies and materials, and which is inexorably linked to a set of metabolically altered set of surrounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Man. A lot to think with, a lot to digest, a lot to absorb. But we will come back to you with questions, with comments, with clarifications after we listen to Sneha Gugutia's paper. Over to you, Sneha.
Thank you, Amita. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just share my screen now. I'll just maybe full. Can you see the full screen, the presentation on full screen?
Yes, looks good.
Oh, let's start with. So, good evening, everyone. First, I would like to begin with by taking this opportunity to say that my work is derived from so many, from the seminal work of so many scholars and thinkers with whom I'm sharing the stage today, that I'm greatly humbled. And second, that my talk today is also about imagination, along with theorization. Thereby, I imagine what else can something mean other than a normative and majoritarian view of it. How does a pig inhabit the city other than seen foraging in the garbage and around nalas, that is open drains? What is its role in this urban fabric? Other than the perception that it is filthy, dirty, and eats garbage? What is its significance other than the perception of the pig being obnoxious? To whom is its life of consequence, and what is its life about? Who are the people who take care of these pigs in the cities? Why is there a Balmiki chalk or a square and a slum always found near the places that the pig inhabits in a city? What are the specifics of this human-animal relation, other than the opinion that the people who rear the pig also consume it? What is the nature of their precarity and their apparent marginalization amid a devalorizing view that people living in slums have a lot of money but still continue to live like that in slums? These imaginations informed my doctoral research and laid the very ground for it. Therefore, in my ongoing doctoral work, I examine human-pig relations in informal settlements or slums in namely two Indian cities, the Globalopolis Delhi and a lesser-known urban hub in the northeast of India, Guwahati. My research questions aim to understand the modes of cohabitation of pigs and humans, who in my study are mainly their rearers, and the nature of their apparent social-spatial marginalization. Within a larger framework of urban governance of non-human life, I investigate the practices and perceptions adopted by the state and the citizenry that render these human porcine relationships and related practices to become informalized and not only devalued in cities, but considered loathsome. These questions took me on a roller coaster journey, whereby I discovered hidden or invisibilized more than human geography, ecologies, and economy, and realized the uneven terrains of disciplinary boundaries or inquiries, such as that of urban political ecologies, which I emphasize is a more than human assembly, and animal geographies, which I argue doesn't consider societal relations and dynamics into its core of analysis, such as those forged by caste and ethnic differences. During this doctoral work, I worked primarily in colonies of scheduled caste communities, the Balmiki, and the Khatiks in Delhi, and the Baspors in Guwahati, as well as scheduled tribes communities of Bodos, Kasaris, Missing, Rabhas, and Rajbonshis, along with black indigenous or the Desi pigs as we understand them, and their exotic selectively bred counterparts in some cases as well. My research brought forth a lived experience of urban precarity and the ways in which the pigs and their humans, that is the rearers and the butchers, dealt with this precarity. I therefore examined the above in a more than human lens, modifying the ethnographic method to become more than human as well, bringing in more than human bodies into my analysis of a class of disenfranchised urban poor. My research informed me that urban precarities can also vary. It is not only social, economic, or political. There can be temporal, cultural, biocapitalistic, or bioeconomic precarities as well. I'll now read out an ethnographic account concerning specifically socio-temporal precarity from my ethnographic work. In Surya Nagar in Delhi, Sunil Mali spends all his evenings, weekdays, holidays on the khatta or the garbage mound. He comes back from work at 4 p.m. and by 4:15 p.m. he's already on the khatta or the garbage mound to feed his pigs. Watching over the pigs would also make Mali happy, as he would express several times. I come here by 4:15 or 5 p.m. I don't care about anyone. If you spend time with other people in the settlement, then there will be a few words that will be exchanged between you and them as well. I stay happy with myself. I sit here, watch them, and do my time pass. We just keep ourselves busy with this. And दूसरों से मतलब नहीं रखते हैं. That is, we do not care for others. Mali further said, the keyword time pass is often used in narratives of the people of India as well as in academic and journalistic writing as a metaphor to denote a range of activities with the connotation that the activity is a non-serious one or simply to kill time. However, further ethnographic inspection revealed the fixations of Valmikis and the Bajpurs over their mahal or the social spatial environment of the settlement and the impact it had on their educational outcomes as well as their aspirations of upward mobility. The pig rearers were extremely disapproving of the people of their own settlements and the kind of activities these people engaged in, such as teasing women, abusing, consumption of alcohol and having street brawls, committing crimes, etc. Therefore, they chose to deal with this socio-temporal precarity by spending their free time in the company of the pigs, who also came out of their thickets only around the rearers, thereby engaging in a conjoint time pass. The research also shows that the making of the urban form is not a human endeavor alone. To survive amidst such urban precarities that is eviscerating, amid state-driven discrimination manifested through an infrastructure that lacked sanitation, the Valmikis and the pigs turned to infrastructuring waste and wasted spaces to make a habitat and thrive. By doing so, they cement their livelihood and life strategies with caste-based social reproduction, as consuming waste reinforces the pigs' impure status and rearing pigs reinforces the Valmikis and the Bajpurs' erstwhile untouchable status. Waste that is consumed by pigs as they left to forage for the greater part of their day and wasted and derelict spaces that are refurbished by pigs as places to eat, live, proliferate, and sleep become infrastructural for pig rearing. Pigs, by the metabolic work and bodily enfleshment, become a form of biocapital, along with being a cultural and social capital for the Valmikis and Bajpurs. They also open up economic avenues for them to deal with urban precarity. Therefore, as a result, pig enmeshments and enfleshments occupy a central position in slum as well as caste ecologies and economies, and pigs become infrastructural for the urban poor to deal with everyday precarities of various kinds. I'll take this moment to just show you two videos from my own fieldwork that might be able to substantiate this further. Please let me know if you can see and hear it. It's not yet played. Can you hear it?
Not yet.
Not yet. I don't know why. Okay. I don't know how to go back.
You can't click on your YouTube link, is it?
Yes. Can you hear it now?
No,
Can you see it?
no, there's nothing moving.
Nothing? No videos playing at your end?
No, we can see your screen with the two videos, but they're both still. They're not playing.
Okay. I'll just continue with the presentation in the interest of time. So that, we don't lose a lot of time. And maybe I can share this later in some way.
Okay.
Okay. If there's time at the end, I'll try again. So
Sounds good.
in Guwahati, on the other hand, there was a rampant mortality of the pigs at the time of the study in 2021, especially in the Bhaspur colonies across the city, due to a disease whose symptoms were similar to that of African swine fever that had recently spread to Assam and other parts of northeast India at that time. This led to cultural precarity, as many communities had postponed their cultural or religious events, even Shraddh, that is the ritual offerings made for the deceased kin on an appointed day after their death. The pig is integral to the cultural functioning and well-being of these communities, as they perform various ritualistic and ceremonial sacrifices as well as slaughter of pigs. This also led to serious issues of endangerment of livelihoods on account of the loss of bar capital that the pigs were to the pastors and numerous scheduled tribe communities rearing pigs in Guwahati. This also affected their cultural economies, but most of all, this left their gorals or their pig sties empty and their lives devoid of pigs. During my field work, the instances of African swine fever in Guwahati was recorded over social media and over so many news channels in India at that time from 2020 onwards. During my field work, readers would often narrate what exactly happened to their pigs. It was like one died today, another tomorrow, said Latika Baspor, explaining how 30 of their pigs died in the month of June in 2020 amidst the lockdown for the coronavirus pandemic. They had fever, were drinking a lot of water, kept sitting, not having to feed. Next morning, 10 had died, narrated Shakuntala Dole from a tribal settlement. Likewise, Bijay Boro from another tribal settlement said that 10 of the pigs died in November 2020 due to the same disease of the pigs that took life of each and every pig in Upper Assam. Upper Assam is where the first and one of the largest instances of pig mortality due to African swine fever was recorded. Om Vaspor had lost 30 to 35 of his pigs in his own scheduled caste colony, Vaspor settlements in Guwahati. The symptoms his pigs showed were fever, blood discharge from mouth and nose, loss of appetite, difficulty in breathing, and miscarriage in pregnant cows. With this, I will now move on to the second part of the presentation, again in the interest of time. Now, the second part that I'm presenting is an idea that I worked on for the sake of the talk today, and I'm still developing. So I would be grateful if you could engage more with it and also think with me, apart from sharing your reflections and critical feedback, and bear with me as I stammer and take awkward pauses to deal with the loss of time. The associated economic practices that the research revealed, despite the conventional norms of industrial production or that of a capital-intensive setup in the West, as well as even in livestock producer farms across India's rural landscape. This concerns the observation of pig rearing setup, or rather what I would call practices, in Delhi and Guwahati's urban metropolitan area where this research was conducted. Every pig rearing setup or practice, or even if they call themselves farms in these above areas, never matched or showed any similarity, though I have written generalizing theories above in this presentation across all my observations. What I mean to highlight is that everyday logistics, workings, and even motivations behind this economy were transient in nature and befitted their everyday struggle of coping up. So one day they would not sell their own pigs for sacrificial purposes, but at another time they would themselves be sacrificing their reared pigs to appease to their goddess, who apparently demands these pigs of them, sometimes even appearing in their dreams and making this demand in a lucid way. Though pigs are lively commodities, valuable in their liveliness and depth, and constantly produce value, they also live within the settlements with these people and develop bonds of kinship and companionship with these people who are the rarest. Furthermore, there is hardly wage labor involved in the settlement, in this setup that are run on the corporation, and these setups, the pig rearing setups, are run on the cooperation of the immediate family members and kin, as well as there is no notion of expanded production or using profits to generate surplus. These are Desi Hisab Kitab, native practices, commented Dharmendra Kumar, a research participant from Delhi, about pig rearing practices and explained that people from his community, that is the Balmiki community, still rear pigs in informal settlements across the city of Delhi. Pig rearing in informal settlements and other kinds of colonies in Delhi and Guwahati somewhere lie in between a rural-urban continuum, blurring the divide between the rural and urban, asking poignant questions of what is an urban formation in such context. Perhaps in addressing these dedicated economies in the larger context of the global south, it is that Aditya Nigam proposes the term molecular economy. Molecular economies are not the traditional sector in the dual economic approach to understanding the third world. They point to economies all over the third world that even includes the agrarian and other rural economies that may or may not lie outside of global capitalism, he says, but at least it can be agreed upon that they are differentially integrated into global capitalism in the sense that they are comparatively local and function on local logics of say supply and demand. These logics are a huge part of everyday living and dealing with urban precarity in informal settlements, as we have seen, and as has been demonstrated above. They also have a dynamism to them. The same I was referring to above is in Nikam's written account of it, but it points to the same dynamism that I was referring to above, that tries to constantly flee from an overcoding machine, says Nikam, that seeks to arrest them, assign them a specific place in the structure that is capitalism. Earlier too, academic thinkers have tried to incorporate such economies in the political economic sphere in the form of informal economies in the writings of Gidwani, Amita Bhaviskar, Wainwright, and need-based economies that was formed of capital surplus, which is the large numbers of migrant populations whom capitalism could not absorb, and hence they engage in a multitude of livelihoods across the city to sustain. However, to say that these activities lie in a political economic sphere only would be a job done wrong. Man Barua extends the notion of political economies and says that the economic cannot be read as an ontologically pure domain separated from culture or ecology, nor should it be seen as embedded in the ecological. He argues that economy, culture, and ecology are co-constituted from the outset, from the start, and terms them surplus ecology, bringing in the notion of ecology over economy. However, the nature of these practices is not only different within the cities, but largely different across Delhi and Guwahati as well. Guwahati is one of the largest pig rearing states in India by its population, whereby approximately 21 lakh pigs are being reared, the highest in the country. Furthermore, the entire northeast region of India, which Assam and Guwahati is a part of, has the highest total consumption of pork in the country, which is around 75%, and 60 to 70% of this requirement of this local demand is fulfilled by importing pigs from other Indian states, even the state of Delhi. Under these circumstances, the pig rearing practices of whatever scale, intensity, and logic are highly driven by the overall city's market supply and demand, and are overall more intensive. I'm speaking specifically about the case of pig rearing practices and setups in Guwahati vis-a-vis Delhi. Pigs are sold at almost a double cost at which it is sold in Delhi. They distinguish between grower pigs and breeding pigs, and wherever possible, based on resources that they have at their disposal, they try to have separate farms for the grower pigs and for the breeding pigs. They sometimes hire labor to do farm work and also expand their backyard farm. In some farms, which is specifically the farms operated by higher caste or family Hindus, such as the Kalitas, they also seem to be distant socially and physically from their pigs, who are put in a semi-pakka or semi-permanent setup, like we can see here below. However, these aspects need more work to be said with this kind of surety, something that was not there within the scope of my research at that time. So when African swine fever hit the city, all these farms were hit, and the molecular economies were actually subjected to the vagaries of the larger market above their local levels as well. However, the primary motivations continued to be cultural, social, temporal, among other non-market motivations. The practices continue to operate at a level of their kin, and more often than not, they're not only guided by local logic and local supply and demand, but also by vernacular ethology or local forms of knowledge embedded in their caste ecologies and ethnic practices. Here we can see local variations to maintaining biosecurity and maintaining their livestock and preventing the rate of mortality due to other reasons as well. A very local way of doing this in their own semi-pakka setup, semi-permanent setup. With this, I will end my presentation. A couple of other pictures that I would like to show. This is the practice adopted within the Basco settlements in Guwahati, and we can see that these are hugely different from the practices in the tribal belts, which seem to be more prosperous and seem to have more space and nature to them. Consequently, the pigs in the tribal areas are also fed more natural feed vis-a-vis the waste feed that they are fed in the Basco or the scheduled caste settlements. And the practices of the scheduled caste communities within a larger sort of a practice of looking down on the scheduled caste communities that came during the 19th and 20th century to do sanitation work from mainland India. Their practices and their pigs are also looked down upon with disgust by even the tribal community. The tribal practices form part of a larger market demand and supply network in Guwahati, whereas the practices of the Bascos of the scheduled caste cultural economy network is contained within their own slum economies and ecologies, like it is in the case of Delhi. With this, I would like to end my presentation. If there is time, should I go ahead and try to play the video?
Yes, please do go ahead.
I'll just try once again. Can Astha try to play it from her side? I don't think it's playing for us.
No.
Okay.
Oh, what a pity. I'm so sorry, Sneha, that didn't work out.
That's okay. I did embed the videos with subtitles as well for this talk, but it's okay.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Could you put the links in the chat later once your presentation is over?
Yeah,
So,
I can do that.
so that people can watch them at leisure.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I end my talk here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sneha. And if you will stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
That was really interesting. And I didn't know that you had also actually worked in Guwahati as well as Delhi, and it looks like Pune as well. So thank you for that. We now turn to Anne Rademacher for her comments on the papers, but in general on this subject of animal ecologies in cities. And I just want to remind other people who are attending that if you have any questions and comments, I think you're supposed to put them down in the Q&A, or just note in the Q&A that you have a question or comment, and I will moderate that conversation after Anne speaks, and then we look forward to the speakers also responding to Anne's commentary and to any other questions and comments that might come up. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Sneha and Man. It's such a pleasure and it's a privilege to be able to be part of this discussion and also to have it here at Ashoka. My comments are more broadly crafted in response to the broader provocation that brings us together rather than the specific papers that we've just heard. And I'm looking forward to more calibrated conversation about the specific papers after I think a little bit together with all of you about that provocation. It's a simple but a very powerful phrase, healing Earth. That phrase, I think, cuts right to praxis, those bridges that we build between our critical thinking and our active and thoughtful practices, both in our research and in the analytical work that we do around, through, and with it. Healing Earth, I think, calls us to better understand and bear witness to environmental loss and destruction and injustice, while we also keep sharpening our attention, helping us to more fully see how the vital practices of care and hospitality and humility come together, even now, to form the fertile soils of life and liveliness. Now, the work we've just heard about, and for many of us, the film that we viewed immediately before, and I suspect for some of us reviewed, invite us to revisit what we thought we knew about cities and about the ecologies that knit us all together, not to romanticize lost environments or summon harmonies that aren't actually there, but rather to linger over the act of noticing what Man Barua has called in his book, Lively Cities, the urban otherwise, an animated and dynamic fabric of interconnections through which human and more than human life continuously co-create the city and one another across time and place, across relations of power and claims to belonging. These authors and artists suggest a new vantage point, a pivot from the usual spaces and places we might go searching for urban natures, to mundane spaces, marginal places, and much of the time to conditions in which humans figure only in relation. One way to reflect on the shift toward animal ecologies might have me recount a recent experience, one that might rhyme with some of your experiences, at least some of us gathered this evening. I'm walking with friends in the dizzy and fuzzy haze of a very early morning, seeking focused encounters with some of Delhi's dizzying diversity of bird life. As we cross into one of the city's biodiversity parks, the landscape opens into a rocky forestscape, painstakingly revegetated according to a many years long effort to create habitat for floral and faunal species considered endemic or native to this place. We know we're here, so to speak, thanks to clear lines. A wall to cross, security guards to clear, spots for cars, walkways for walking, signboards to cheer on our eco-enthusiasm and to acquaint us with key tree species and to implore us not to feed the animals here. As the ambient soundscape fills with birdsong and our purview turns many shades of green and ochre, saunters with binoculars and unnaturally large protruding cameras, that is us, vie for space along the trail with morning walkers, enthusiastic joggers, and fellow creatures. We start to see more subtle lines in the landscape too. Dense and homogeneous kikar forest over there beyond the park, but mixed trees and shrubs and grasses here at closer range. All of their layers seem teeming with birds, much to our delight, but perhaps to the annoyance of the walkers that we block every time we stop with a jolt, fix our binoculars upward, and exercise our classification acumen. It's not enough to name the species. We index our bird knowledge know-how by reciting biographies. That one is a juvenile or an adult, here for the season or resident, common, uncommon, rare, impossible. This morning may last long after our walk comes to an end, too, stretching into the temporality of the virtual by registering all we saw and heard in elaborate online social and scientific communities that will turn our bird seeing outing into a contribution to vast aggregations of bird data across ecosystems and life worlds and landscapes and time. But at the height of our bird immersion, in which we've marveled and reveled and certainly strengthened social ties between us and our personal and shared sense of nourishment from encounters with bird life, we're stopped in our tracks. A man and woman are crouched at the trail's edge, clutching a bag stuffed with rotis, breaking bits and tossing them to the gathered birds. Later, we see a similar sight of transgressive feeding, this time with different people and different recipients, this time a small group of dogs. My companions grumble, restating the park rules and rehearsing a long set of concerns about the health and well-being of the animals in the park, the importance of ecological intactness here, a place where non-humans are understood to have primacy of belonging, somehow protected from industrial food or the myriad toxics and wastes that course through the soils and waters and air of the wider city fabric. Now, whether or not this scene is familiar, you may hear me sketch it out with a ready critique, conscious of the rich history of scholarship that complicates these sorts of ideas of an urban nature space. From Amita Bhavaskar's long ago insights into bourgeois environmentalism to more recent work in urban political ecology and history and geography, including recent work by Shubha Gururani about the very same park that we just imagined walking in. The critical imperative to understand the ecology of cities has been to understand them as also products of shifting land regimes, ever urbanizing peripheries, and reconfigured social and material relations of land, of property, of community, and of place. Our goal is neither to celebrate a romanticized notion of some harmonious lost commons or to undermine or disrespect the enormous challenge of making and nurturing specific spaces for nature in cities. Still, questions of which forms nature takes and which forms count as wild and native and therefore somehow more legitimate, while others are feral or invasive and therefore not. These questions replay and pull us back to core concerns about who urban nature serves and who's left at the margins or in the ruins, cast away. Now, for many of us, these may be the core questions, at least of an older urban ecology, questions that resonate with what the social theorist Raymond Williams long ago propositioned, that ideas of nature are always ideas of people in society. That worldview and the body of social and urban theory to which it gave rise has long dominated academic conversations that have assembled under rubrics like urban theory, urban planning, urban studies. And one might call it, as Mann has in his book Lively Cities, theory in a major key, a dominant posture with a ready set of universalist diagnostics, many of which start with C: capitalism, colonialism, control. After reading Mann's lively work, one understands more clearly how that same theory in a major key has left our worldview limited, ready to diagnose transformation in urban environments as though they're all at some point ultimately commensurate, as though a city is a city is a city, eventually knit together by a long and tenacious history of global imperialism, capitalism, and their accompaniments. If we're students of the most recent impulses in that theory in a major key, we might end our diagnostic journey with a rather homogenizing and yet curiously fashionable conclusion called planetary urbanism. Work in urban ecologies in animal ecologies, on the other hand, asks, what if cities are not necessarily headed toward the same forms of urbanization? What if change is two-way rather than one way? To go further, what if the social extends beyond like kinds, so that social interaction allows forms of life to interact, react to one another, become together by being together in myriad ways. Our critical theories, at least the dominant ones, may have narrowed and flattened and blinded us to a fuller way of understanding the life, the liveliness of cities, and therefore our capacity, as the title of the symposium suggests, to heal much of anything. You can imagine the sea change that work like we've been sharing in this evening represents. Here is historicized, woven in place work that forges a posture that fully reworks that bird-focused walk in a biodiversity park. For one thing, it's unlikely to locate itself inside of a designated urban nature space at all. In this work, the borders that we make to quarantine the human from the other than human worlds are considered untenable and part of a more visceral politics of cities that are fractured along uneven social fault lines. This work follows the movements of animals, of feed, of waste, a perspective that stretches cities in all kinds of unexpected directions and calls our attention to spatial relations and interactive practices that are not just here, but out there beyond, wherever the meshwork of relations takes us. We could go back to the biodiversity park, though. Those moments of transgressive feeding would not be so roundly dismissed, for they would be opportunities to notice and think about the relations that are fostered through the offering of food, that is through commensality. By noticing how and when and who is feeding, nurturing, offering hospitality to whom, and why and when, we have a new perspective on what is accommodated in the city, to what extent and why. This is a fuller attention to the idea of urban hospitality, and it pushes us beyond the fixed lines that we often use to delineate contamination and threat, and to animate our own ideologies of belonging. Likewise, the walls that we cross to mark the inside of the park, the work of animal ecologies might just stop right there and consider those walls as habitat, as living infrastructure for the more than human world as well as the human one. Conduits, perhaps, substrates, perhaps, material and chemical formations that are as ripe for inquiry and interaction as the soil, vegetation, or air. Whether or not a species belongs in a lively city is a more evasive and deeply historical question. Among the many animals that he follows in lively cities, Munn studies parakeets in London in a way that challenges our ecological confidence in ideas of ferality, invasion, of urban belonging itself. This kind of posture asks us to linger over the ways that animals are discursively constituted as a marginal social group, subject to all kinds of inclusions or exclusions from the city. From here, we might look at animals' own urban life worlds differently, ultimately seeing how they too co-compose the urban. Consider how Sneha works outward, starting with the lifeways and habitat-making practices of pigs. We are invited to an entirely different perspective on how the city comes into being. Sneha writes that at certain sites, sows use a canopy of derelict vegetation to make nests, to give birth and nurse their young, while at other sites, piles of plastic wastes are ideal for deriving warmth and for protection of piglets and their mother. Similarly, at another site, a puddle created by a broken sewage pipe is frequently used by pigs during the hot summer months to cool off and drink water from. This tells, she writes, a whole other story of the built environment, one that's often glossed over in humanist accounts of informal settlements and their infrastructures. Meanwhile, those who tend the pigs collect waste food from restaurants, canteens, and messes to feed their animals. Discarded tubs, drums, and crates are repurposed to serve as troughs. The architecture of the slums, she writes, is reworked to accommodate pigs. Again, from this vantage point, Sneha argues that we may have reduced, what we may have reduced to a slum economy is actually also a slum ecology, an assemblage through which social, cultural, and economic lives of humans and more than humans are co-produced and fulfilled. It may go without saying that the ripple effects of the urban otherwise as a posture and perspective assemble a whole range of important recent directions in the study of urban form, urban history, and cities in South Asia and beyond. We will all have our lists, the many books, articles, and conversations that have reminded us that plants and animals make places their own and adapt them to their ends. I think of work as far-ranging as Radhika Govindarajan's Animal Intimacies or Nikhil Anand's Anthropocene, in which the liveliness of Mumbai, rather than ending with the marine life of coastal waters, starts there. Or bundles of unlikely but generative comparisons, like the one undertaken by the Enduring Harm Project. Here, Philadelphia and Mumbai are brought into conversations as places where both contemporary and historical practices of governing urban waters come together. We might even mark new analytical vocabularies, like those that have emerged from the South Asia Urban Climates Collective, from scholars like Nita Raymond and Aparna Parnik. We might even look to our bookshelves, to the collection of chapters in the beautiful and very differently situated perspectives found in the first garden of the Republic. There are so many more. Animal Ecologies, I think, offers us a generative perspective for an urgent time, a time usually invoked through the refrains of loss and implosion. This work doesn't ignore the making and reproduction of exclusion and marginality, but it reminds us that urban environments are also places in which practices of care and hospitality, of being with and being of one another, live and may even be lively. There's far more to see in this posture, but for now, I want to pose a few short questions for us to consider. The most central one comes back to the symposium, Healing Earth. Man and Sneha, how would each of you reflect on the ways that your work can and does resituate our understanding of care and healing Earth? In other words, how does your work inform new visions of praxis? Secondly, given that both of you write and work in ways that challenge given logics of what belongs where in cities, and knowing that we all inhabit a historical present marked by ever more virulent nativist logics of belonging, how and can animal ecology's perspectives refocus us? That is, what are the politics of possibility for you that work like this could signal? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Those were amazing questions, and I love the way in which you took us on a walk along with you, birding through an ecologically restored landscape. I think I know which one you went to. But it's through those sorts of experiences, your body being in a particular place, that I think one comes to reflect on these questions in the particular ways that we do. And it is, critical reflection is an intrinsic part of what makes research possible across different kinds of sites, across different kinds of scales. What you left us with reminded me of, Jacques Derrida's essay on cosmopolitanism, where he's writing about hospitality when offered to those who have left their own inhospitable places, refugees, migrants, and the need to welcome them not only for their sake, but for one's own. And when I think of the word cosmopolitanism, I think of its root in the cosmos. And I therefore think of the ways in which what you're directing our attention towards, and for Man and for Sneha as well, are the larger practices of care, reciprocity, and generosity that are also there in the world. I'm very curious to hear what Sneha and Man have to say about this. I have my own responses, but I'm not going to, abuse my privilege as moderator. But before we get to Man and Sneha, I'd love to hear any more questions. Actually, how do you want to do it, Sneha and Man? Do you want to sort of respond to Anne, or do you want to take other questions first?
You can respond to Anne first, and you,
Great.
and then
Yeah, I think we are fine as far as time goes. We have about 25-ish minutes. So who would like to start? Sneha, you go first.
okay. I might have to ask you to repeat your question, but I think, Anne, your question was about care and healing in the larger context of care and healing. Like, how can the politics that or the understanding that emerges from this kind of study help to resituate our understanding based on care and healing towards uh, care and healing, the larger theme. I think this is one of the most difficult questions that I or anybody working with animals in a setup where the animal is ultimately killed, and there's this larger notion of violence understood in a particular way. Uh, when we are working in this setup, the larger question it's very difficult to answer these questions, especially vis-a-vis other kind of inquiries in animal studies, critical animal geographies, critical animal studies. Vis-a-vis these kind of other trends of inquiry, it is a bit difficult so as not to be insensitive. But what I feel is it's also necessary to sometimes take a step back and leave your shoes behind at the threshold of the door when you're entering into this world. The shoes that you wear as an animal, as a lover, as a vegetarian maybe, or as an activist, as an animal rights advocate, or as being a pet owner. So it's important to leave the shoes behind. And it's one thing that the research needs to do. So personally, having been part of the animal welfare and rescue sort of work in my own personal capacity, the work asked me to leave those shoes behind and to interrogate more intimately in a deep via deep conversations. What is exactly happening? Do I really understand these practices? Is there any aspect of care in the seemingly violent practices which seem even more violent because of the informality? These analysis did they point me towards other structures, systematic structural systems that sort of informalized and placed this violence, situated this violence in the first place in this area. I would like to recall one of the work by Yamini Narayanan on cow protectionism, on basically cow what do you call, she calls cow as so basically transporting cow from one state to another. And she talks about jugaad or the making do strategies of people amid when they're trying to navigate different laws. And she tries to understand the violence that is inflicted on the cow in terms of the strategies that people employ when it comes to be able to continue with their trade. That they do for various reasons. What seems as economic or for their own benefit or for their own greed of non-vegetarianism on the surface might have many layers of many other layers to it. So using the concept of jugaad or innovativeness in the face of precarity to understand these extremely violent doings that people engaged in with the animal, which in this case was the bovine, helped us to look beyond what seems at the surface. Similarly, I feel that if we attempt, and during my work, I came across many such data online on, say, how animal welfare or animal protectionist organizations, the kind of activities, the kind of programs undertake towards welfare and rights and well-being of the animals. Within that, I saw a number of sting operations that people would conduct in animal slaughterhouses. They would dress up and they would hide their identity, their cameras. They would come up with videos of bloodshed, of slaughter, and that would provoke a larger politics and a larger activism against these not just this geographically in that area, but also against these communities, and also sometimes they speak for what is right for the animal. So from that point of view, I feel sometimes understanding these larger systems or the systemic nature of this violence, the other parties who might be involved even in their own, even when they don't understand, might sometimes being a vegan and saying that I'm a vegan because animals are violence is inflicted on animals without on an everyday at a large scale, might also inflict violence in terms of enforcing colonial strategies or Western strategies of food and other capitalist practices to third world nations. So there's so many other kinds of politics and so many other kinds of violence behind what seems violence in the surface. This is what I can think of right now at care, and I feel healing can begin if we try to come to the level of the ground reality sometimes, or take a step back from, or leave our shoes behind, and sometimes try to investigate and ask or look more into what might seem to be at the surface. Second, could you repeat your second question on the hospitality, animal ecology perspective and possibility of work? Yeah, I guess, did I answer both the questions?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Happy to repeat them if you'd like, but that was a beautiful answer.
That's okay. Amita, could you say what exactly you were talking about? Care, reciprocity, and generosity.
I didn't have a specific question. I was just sort of,
reflecting
the thoughts that came into my head listening to Anne. But I think, Sneha, you're absolutely right that one sign of privilege is the ability to put a distance between one's own lifestyle and the violence that it imposes on other lives. In cities, we see what is a kind of spatial apartheid between the busties that you describe and the homes and neighborhoods of the well-to-do. But so also is the distance between, this brightly lit room in which I'm sitting and the coal mining and the thermal power plant stations where where this electricity that runs the lights and the air conditioning, etc., is generated. So I think you're right. You're very right there that structural violence is often invisible from those who are its primary beneficiaries. But I think Anne was also talking about the kind of killing that is done respectfully. And I'm thinking again of Govindarajan's work in Animal Intimacies, that, you can love a cow and you can bring it up and still you can sacrifice it. And, she examines those relationships there. So I didn't hear Anna sort of saying that you must not kill. But I think looking at the conditions of life as well as the conditions for a good death, if not a good death, at least not so bad death. But I'm speaking too much, and Man, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for such generous insights and comments. You really kind of made this much more vibrant and alive than I could ever imagine to do myself. And Amita, thank you for your questions. I'm just trying to think about this question of care and healing. I think where my work, and probably resonates to a certain extent with Sneha's work, is that what I've been trying to do with this work and thinking with one's interlocutors is to not reproduce the logics of animal activism and the ways it sort of plays out in certain forms of multi-species studies and animal studies. Because quite often I find, and this is also there in your wonderful work, Amita, is that it reproduces the very logics for which political ecologists rightly have lambasted conservationists, kind of valuing animal life over human life. Often I think the politics gets reduced to that question that, oh, look at the frail conditions in which these animals are kept, or, frail conditions in which these animals are foraging amidst garbage and so on and so forth. And I think in lively cities, the argument was that you need to look at certain alignments between people and animals that inhere in very fraught spaces, and how those could be ways of creating possibilities for another kind of lived city, which is really nicely exemplified by Sneha's examples of pig keeping, in the informal settlements in Delhi and Guwahati. But I think that that work was written, well, I finished it in 2021 and it's just come out now. I think that work was very much more hopeful than I am now, in thinking about the urban condition, not but different conditions of urbanicity in different parts of the world. And the more recent fieldwork I've been doing around metabolism and actually urban wetlands, is to try and think about, how do you write about the urban without hope? Because we see time and time again that these very frail arrangements, right? People keeping pigs in informal settlements, or, banana vendor making money by kind of selling bananas to devotees and so on and so forth. They're continuously facing onslaughts, whether it's by capital or the state capital nexus. So I've been thinking much more now about questions of fugitivity, questions of opacity, and in some ways a kind of infra-politics, that, the politics of not direct confrontation, but the ways in which people make do by avoiding, by, enacting certain kinds of lives outside of capture, to use kind of Abdul Malik Simon's term. So it's really, I think it's about thinking of this condition without hope and seeing, okay, what politics, the politics of make do only gets you so far. And we're seeing this now across, here in India. It's the onslaughts are really brutal. But I think the second set of questions that come to the fore, in a way, with obliquely addressing your question on hospitality, Amita, which in the London context I was talking about, how whether we can be hospitable to a non-native bird, and what happens when you have these very frail alignments between a migrant who's selling peanuts in Hyde Park, and these feral birds which are seen as not welcome in Britain. So I think that question of the cosmopolitan and hospitality is certainly there, although again, time and time again, is the brutalness of hostility that comes into the picture, for me. So it's really about these kinds of opacity. What lines of flight might still be possible when you have brutal onslaughts? I think that's really the question. But something else that I would like to mention, which maybe didn't come out with the talk so much, but it's the other kind of violence that we are seeing is what Gabrielle Hecht in her recent work has very aptly called residual governance, where she says that, in contexts like South Africa, and you can say places like Guwahati, the future has already arrived. And this is about living in a world of industrial effluent. But where governance is not about trying to manage toxic environments, but it's about ignorance, it's about denial, and it's about simplification. You see this with say, in Shaunik's wonderful film, you see this with the question with how air pollution is managed, for instance. It's ignorance and denial. So how is life reproduced under conditions of disposability? And I think where I'm trying to go with this work on metabolism as well is to think of life in environments of industrialized eating and industrialized effluent, where life becomes residual, where you'll be living in toxic environments, and where forms of governance are really sidestepping, some of these very thorny issues. There's no plan, there is no treatment, pollution doesn't exist, but we are enmeshed in that world. So I think I'm a bit more, kind of disillusioned or kind of, about this whole thing. And I think these are sort of questions that really interest me at the moment.
And I saw a sort of thread running through both the papers on this very question. Um, when you began your paper, Man, your reference to the broiler chicken as the index of the Anthropocene in a way reminded me that yes, it's been called the Gallocene. And jumping then to Anna Singh writing about the plantation scene, the same sort of standardization at scale that you described, the same monoculture, the same emphasis on yield above all else. But what Sneha's paper reminded me of with her discussion of African swine fever is that monocultures are also much more vulnerable to particular diseases. And we know with, avian flu and so on, that this is capable of wiping out, all the birds at one go. And perhaps the local breeds you talk about, which are actually not quite so local as you say, because they're actually hybrids of imported breeds. But perhaps there's resilience there in who will survive the one can't even call them unexpected anymore, right? Who will survive the pandemic? And I actually share that sense of bleakness with you uh, because I don't expect change to come from particular agents acting as agents, but from the ways in which things come together and resistance emerges from those assemblages. Um, because the industrial system, be it of food production or I think Sneha also the way you talk about the different kinds of pig rearing, which is cooperative, it can be artisanal, it can be something you do on the side as time pass. I mean, there's a richness there in terms of how these ecological niches fit together with what other people do, with what pigs do. But let me now turn to the questions that have been asked. There are a couple of them for Sneha. Aditya Pathak, do you want to ask them yourself or should I read them out? Oh, I think maybe participants can't ask questions. Okay, so Aditya says, have you tried to understand the relationship between pigs and caste Hindus in Delhi, which is as opposed to Guwahati, which is sort of south of the global south, as Professor Barua calls it? If yes, what are the difference in multi-species relations in both these cities? So this seems to be a question about, caste on the one hand and, sort of more different cultural attitudes towards pigs with, tribal groups in the Northeast. And the second question, how does this non-human-human relation translate in terms of everyday politics? So would you like to address that?
Yes. So basically, I do not work with caste Hindus in either Delhi and in Guwahati. I did keep meeting people during my field work, and through them I could know what their stand is about the animal, about the needs of the animal. But I conducted a lot of juridical research. I did a lot of research on juridical records. I also tried to, and this was all, I was doing all of this on an online platform. And I was also collecting a lot of complaints from citizen complaint forums online. I went and visited the municipal departments, veterinary offices to collect complaints that come to them over a phone line or in person, and also try to understand from their department heads what kind of concerns do people have. So these were some of these complaints were collected through an online platform. So not as a primary fieldwork based data. But the reason but some of these things, and I did that both in Delhi and in Guwahati. Of course, in Guwahati, the availability of these complaints on an online forum was limited compared to in Delhi, where everything seems to be fabulously digital, available on a digital platform. And I also looked up lots of videos that people could post about nuances in their neighborhood. So the people would post up videos about pigs on YouTube, saying, this pig is there and it's eating a garbage in our neighborhood. So I collected such videos also. I collected a lot of articles speaking about the perspective of the general citizenry, which included caste, Hindus, and everybody who's an other when it comes to these settlements. Even me and people who are from lesser privileged backgrounds, but higher in caste and class and in area in livability to the participants that I was looking at. The sex, so based on that, I am running out of my thought and I forgot what I was trying to say. Can I come back with my?
Of
I
course.
just lost my train of
Yeah.
thought completely.
Yeah, go ahead. Take your time, no rush. Man, do you want to say something? Or Anne?
We have had the same, some of the same experiences.
Okay. Okay, Man, why don't you go ahead and then we'll come to Anne.
Sorry, I've lost track of what the question was.
The question was, I think it started off as a question about Delhi and Guwahati as different cities. I understood the question to mean that in Delhi, because pigs are associated with, Dalits, there's a kind of stigma around it, whereas pigs in the Northeast, don't have that. So it seemed to me a question about the different kinds of social relations and the cultural meanings that pigs have in different places, which may also perhaps refer to different kinds of places within the larger metabolism of the urban.
I mean, it's a great question. Of course, Sneha is much better placed to answer this, and I think you have. It begs this wider question: is where do we kind of think of Southern theory from, and the so-called tier 2 or even more ordinary cities can give us a different set of vistas as to how metabolic life is fractured along what kinds of lines. So in Delhi, of course, with Sneha's example, you see caste being so predominant, whereas in a city like Delhi, it's ethnicity really, less than caste. It's the minority Muslim population, or whether it's the tribal communities. And in the example, maybe it didn't come out as much in my presentation, but you see all this work, whether it's slaughter, the rearing of chickens, the dealing with the offal, all of that and waste is done by Muslim communities. So they really underline the city's metabolism. And at the same time, they are subjected to all kinds of violence by the state, dispossession, being thrown out of where they're living, and so on and so forth. So I think caste has, I think, emerged as a very important question now to think about urban ecologies from the South. But it also begs this question is, where from the South are we thinking about? And I think just sort of opening up that debate, is certainly important, because Delhi is a very specific case. This has that whole, in your work as well. I mean, Amita, you talk about the whole world-class city idea, which really dictates so much about, whether cattle should be there in the streets or not, or whether pigs should be there in formal settlements. Whereas Guwahati has no tag to aspire to. It doesn't aspire to it. So I think that you see a very weak presence of the state in these sort of matters. And I think those things become very important, when we say, okay, what are these urban ecologies? But going back to the earlier discussion, when we think about pollution and effluence and metabolism and your comments as well, what I've been thinking more and more is that all of these things emerge from a particular kind of biopolitics. In India, the whole poultry industry is linked to the kind of logics of development, right? So developmentality, as Tanya Marelli would call it, or other scholars like Wanabe Shamadar and people. But although these sort of the issues that we see now, say Namakkal, for instance, the egg capital of India, is replete with huge, large-scale pollution. And there have been quite a few cases about this. so these things are scripted within biopolitical logics, but the problems I think we're confronting now, whether it's pollution and so forth, is not necessarily discernible through its logics. So it's a very interesting moment, I think, when we're thinking about healing Earth, that, the present condition has emerged because of a certain biopolitical impetus to order life, but the problems that we're confronted with can't be discerned through this logic of improvement, through this logic of quarantining and so on and so forth. I think that's really a conundrum that we have to find a kind of vocabulary to deal with. And the state is doing it through certain ways, through denial, through ignorance, let certain bodies be exposed. But what inheres then, how this machinery is going to rework this, I think is really interesting.
Thank you, Man. Anne, do you like to respond or add to what you said?
I'm seeing another question from the participants. Amita, I wonder if we want to pose them.
Thank you. There's actually two questions. I'm going to ask you both of those together, and you are free to answer the ones you like. There's a question from Abhishruti Sharma, who thanks you for a very interesting panel. Was thinking about the ideas of wild, domestic, and feral animals. How do we qualify these terms in your conception of a metabolic city? I was thinking about the vulture breeding center in Rani, I believe in the outskirts of Guwahati. Does that make vultures all of it wild, domestic, and feral when they are when they're released? I suppose that's what Abhishruti means. That's one. And second, from Gunjan Chauhan, could Man and Sneha reflect on their fieldwork experiences? How can one begin with thinking and doing more than human ethnography? So, since the first question is about the metabolic city, Man, why don't you tackle that?
Sure. I actually wanted to show an image to kind of qualify what I'm going to say. But yeah, well, the cultivated, the feral, the wild, I think works if you're looking at, the whole-bodied kind of animal. What I'm trying to get at here, and possibly shooting myself in the foot as well in the process, is to say that, well, when you think of metabolism, it's not just what is an animal, but when is an animal. And if you think of the chicken, it's becomes a locus in a field of continual transformation. So even the notion of what we say is an animal, is troubled. So I think it's not easy to kind of these categories kind of don't work when your analytics shift to something else. In terms of Rani, that's why I wanted to show a photograph. Later, maybe if I find it, I will. But it's very interesting. What you actually see with vultures is the decline of the vulture as an urban bird. So there is wonderful photographs by Gautam Narayan from the 1980s in Delhi, where the city, there were 3,000 vultures in just one frame. And this was largely because before diclofenac, the open dumping of cattle in urban spaces. There was a very famous bone mill in Delhi, for instance, and similarly in Guwahati, is not of the same scale, but you see the vulture as an urban bird. What you now see is, in a way, vultures have disappeared. Barring the Egyptian vulture, you don't see any vultures in Delhi. In Guwahati, where you do see vultures, are in the kind of the urban extensions, and they're largely a rural agrarian bird because of the decline of cattle. I mean, diclofenac, yes, but the decline of cattle from cities, so you are seeing a shift. And so in that sense, if you want to think of vultures and the cultivated and feral and wild, I think they are wild in that broader sense, but it's not the wild becoming urban. I think, the vultures that you see now are really by and large rural birds. If I can find that image, I'll share it with you all.
Yeah, we have only about 4 or 5 minutes to go before we end. So yeah, while you're looking for that image, Man, I turn to Sneha if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll just try to answer Aditya's second question. So when he was asking about Delhi vis-a-vis Guwahati. In both my contexts, I was working more deeply with scheduled caste communities who are disadvantaged in terms of caste in the Indian Hindu-Indian hierarchical structure. But within Guwahati, what I found was people had an additional, wow, this is in Guwahati, man.
No, this is Delhi. I just wanted to show it to you. This
Oh
is,
my
you know,
God.
mass extinction. This is the scale, basically. Okay, I'll stop sharing, but
Wow.
What have we done now? Uh, so, uh, so in Guwahati, people from mostly scheduled caste community who also had this additional layer of anxiety on their Assamese identity. They were anxious to be understood and termed as Assamese, as Ahomia. So they had elementary anxieties with vis-a-vis the pig rearing and pig pork eating practices. They had this increased interactions with the trading class, the Marwaris in Guwahati, and with other people with whom they worked with. Most of them continue to be in the sweeping, manual scavenging, and the sanitation profession, which bears the historical burden of caste and untouchability. But people who are moving out, who are getting educated, they had a lot of elementary anxieties over consumption of pork and pig rearing, as to what it will do to this historical burden of caste, and as to what it will do to this burden of not being understood as Assamese, having left their own homeland and or their own ancestral places or more than a century ago. They wanted to be understood as Assamese. So vis-a-vis Delhi, when we look at these aspects of Guwahati, and therein we look looking at animals sometimes help us to probe these questions between the Delhis and the Guwahatis of the world, and sort of something that I've been looking at through the project that I work with in urban ecologies is to also provincialize these sort of experiences and address to the dirt in the epistemological and the ontological, the gaps and the voids in theory, as we try to understand the urbanicity, the urban processes and the urbanisms and the problems of the world. So I think this helps to provincialize a bit. And I think Gunjan, you can please get in touch because there's less of time.
Yeah, if you can, you have 30 seconds to respond to Gunjan.
I'm just saying that Gunjan, I've shared my email ID with you. You can look up Man and me online. You can get in touch because there's very little time. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thanks, Neha. Anne, over to you.
Well, I want to thank both Man and Sneha for your papers, but also for expanding what our understanding both of those papers, but also the potentials of thinking in this way. One of you said that animals lead us to relations, that animals lead us to places. Those relations need not be between like kinds. I think that that's quite an important fundamental insight, whether it takes us to places of healing, care, and hopeful places, or Man, as you eloquently reminded us, takes us to places of toxicity and absence and decline. I'm looking forward, I have to admit, to the forthcoming conversation about the film, because I think that there are aspects of All That Breathes that not only augment, but I think push at some of the edges of the conversation we've started to have here. So I'm grateful for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Anne Rademacher. Thank you, Man Barua and Sneha Gudgutia, for presenting your work. And clearly, this is a conversation that's just begun. And you have just given us so much to think about. We will carry this on another occasion, but hopefully very soon. And thank you, everybody who's been participating, listening in. Thank you for your questions. And we now go over to the next session, which is a discussion with Nadeem Shehzad and Mohammed Saud, the brothers who star in All That Breathes.
Thank you so much, and Amita, Sneha, please.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be in your company.
जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता था। खूंखार रेप्टाइल लगती थी किसी और प्लेनेट से। जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता था। खूंखार रेप्टाइल लगती थी किसी और प्लेनेट से। जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता।
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ इसको डिवोट कर दी है।
खूंखार रेप्टाइल लगती थी किसी और प्लेनेट से। जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता।
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ इसको डिवोट कर दी है।
खूंखार रेप्टाइल लगती थी किसी और प्लेनेट से। जब हम पहली चील घर लाए, मैं देर रात जागकर उसे घूरता।
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ इसको डिवोट कर दी है। क्या है इसको?
उंगली को दिखा रही है मुझे, मेरे ऊपर आसान कर रही है क्या?
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ इसको डिवोट कर दी है। क्या है इसको?
उंगली को दिखा रही है मुझे, मेरे ऊपर आसान कर रही है क्या?
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ
होता है अगर हम अंदर जाके लेटेंगे तो चीजें हमें भी खाएंगे क्या? जाके लेट कर देख ले।
क्या है इसको?
उंगली को दिखा रही है मुझे, मेरे ऊपर आसान कर रही है क्या?
मैंने अपनी पूरी लाइफ
होता है अगर हम अंदर जाके लेटेंगे तो चीजें हमें भी खाएंगे क्या? जाके लेट कर देख ले।
क्या है
हम
इसको?
सब हवा की बिरादरी
उंगली को दिखा रही है मुझे, मेरे ऊपर आसान कर रही है क्या?
जो जो चीजें सांस लेती हैं उनमें कोई फर्क नहीं दिखना चाहिए। हम सब हवा की बिरादरी
Rescue Center in Wazirabad in North Delhi to be with us. You know, like the kites that soar in the film and that you rescue and heal in Wazirabad in North Delhi to be with us. You know, like the kites that soar in Okay. Like the kites that soar in the sky. We see in the film Nadeem Bhai and Saud Bhai also letting the imagination soar. There's poetry as well as a lot of tender care in the film, in your words and so on. तो हमारे हजारों क्वेश्चंस हैं इतनी खूबसूरत फिल्म के बारे में और आप जो काम करते हैं उसके बारे में और सवाल पूछने के लिए we have 3 Ashokans. Abhishruti Sharma, who's doing her PhD in sociology anthropology. We have Aman Krishna and Manasi Narula, both of whom are students, Ashoka Scholars Program, doing thesis in history. All have a keen interest in cities and come from different cities themselves and have seen the film. So what we're going to do is that Abhishruti, Aman, or मानसी आपसे सवाल पूछेंगे और उसके बाद अगर ऑडियंस से कोई सवाल हो तो वो भी हम लेंगे। हमारे पास कुल कुछ 50 मिनट हैं, तो आराम से करेंगे, इत्मीनान से, कोई जल्दी नहीं है। सो ओवर टू यू, हूज बिगिन?
Hello, okay. So other people rescue dogs, some look after cows, but you rescue birds. Why birds? Is there something special about them? And when did you start this bird rescue?
स्पेशली बर्ड्स इसीलिए क्योंकि स्पेशली बर्ड्स इसी के लिए और स्पेशली बर्ड्स ऑफ प्रे, क्योंकि जब हमने स्टार्ट किया तो इनके लिए कोई करने वाला नहीं था। जो भी अब वेटरनरी हॉस्पिटल्स से जो रेस्क्यू सेंटर्स वगैरह थे इनके लिए, वो काउस, डॉग्स, कैट्स इन सब के लिए होते थे। और जो बर्ड हॉस्पिटल्स हैं वो मेनली जो थे उस टाइम वो टेम्पल्स के अंदर सिचुएटेड थे, और टेम्पल्स में वो बर्ड्स को मीट नहीं दे सकते थे एज अ फूड। तो उस टाइम जो बर्ड हॉस्पिटल्स थे दिल्ली में, वो बर्ड्स ऑफ प्रे को एक्सेप्ट ही नहीं करते थे, क्योंकि उनके पास वो उनको फीड नहीं करते। तो इसलिए हमने बर्ड्स ऑफ प्रे के लिए स्टार्ट किया। और वैसे तो एक थोड़ी लंबी स्टोरी है इसके पीछे। ये बात होगी लगभग कोई मिड 1990s की, जब हम काफ़ी छोटे छोटे थे। मैं 11-12 साल का रहूँगा। तो हम एनिमल्स का टेक केयर करते रहते थे उस टाइम भी। जो भी कोई एनिमल मिल गया, जैसे कोई कैट, किटन, या कोई पिजन, या कोई दूसरा बर्ड, तो जैसे उनको मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट चाहिए होता था तो हम उनको जो बर्ड हॉस्पिटल थे वहाँ ले जाते थे। तो एक दिन हमको रोड साइड पर एक इंजर्ड ब्लैक काइट मिली। तो हमने ये ब्लैक काइट को पिक किया और उठाकर उसको एक पास में बर्ड हॉस्पिटल है वहाँ ले गए। जब हम उसको वहाँ ले जाते हैं तो जैसे हमने उसको बॉक्स से निकाला तो वहाँ का जो स्टाफ था उसने उसको टच करने से भी मना कर दिया, क्योंकि वो बर्ड ऑफ प्रे है और वो मीट खाता है। तो उन्होंने हमको वापस भेज दिया कि आप इसको ले जाओ, हम इसका ट्रीटमेंट नहीं करेंगे। तो हम उसको पूरे दिन लेकर घूमे, कभी किसी के पास से, कभी कोई, जो लोग कबूतर उड़ाते हैं तो उनके बर्ड भी वो इंजर्ड हो जाते हैं, तो वो भी उनको ट्रीट किया करते थे। वहाँ भी ले गए, उन्होंने भी हमको मना कर दिया। ऐसे करते करते पूरा दिन गुजर गया। फिर आखिर में रात में जब हम थक गए तो जिस स्पॉट से बर्ड हमको मिला था हमने वापस उसको वहीं छोड़ दिया। और फिर नेक्स्ट डे हमने फिर उसको देखा वहाँ जाकर, तो वो बर्ड वहाँ नहीं। तो ऐसे ही टाइम गुजरता रहा, ऐसे ही बर्ड्स हमको मिलते रहे। ये चील जो ब्लैक काइट है, तो हमने उनको पिक भी नहीं करते थे उस टाइम, कि अगर हम उनको पिक भी करेंगे तो लेकर कहाँ जाएंगे। तो ये अराउंड एक 2002 की बात है। तो एक ऐसे ही बर्ड हमको 2003 सॉरी, तो एक ऐसे ही बर्ड हमको एक किसी पार्किंग में मिला। तो हम फिर उसको छोड़ नहीं पाए। हमने सोचा कि अगर हम इसको छोड़ देंगे तो ये मर जाएगा, और अगर हम कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते तो अगर हम उसको अपने घर भी ले जाते हैं तो अगर वो मर भी जाता, उसको ट्रीटमेंट भी नहीं मिलता, तो कम से कम उसको एक पीसफुल डेथ मिल जाएगी। तो इस तरह से जो पहला बर्ड था, जो ब्लैक काइट थी पहली, तो हम उसको अपने घर ले आए। एक हमने छत पर छोटा सा एनक्लोजर बनाया हुआ था, तो उसमें उसको रखते थे और डे टाइम में खुला छोड़ते थे। तो वो जुवेनाइल था, तो उसके पेरेंट्स उसको ढूंढते ढूंढते आ गए थे। तो जब हम उसके साथ छत पर होते थे तो उसके पेरेंट्स आकर हमको मारा गया। तो इस तरह से फर्स्ट काइट आई। फिर आसपास लोगों ने देखा और हमको जैसे कोई दूसरी मिली, हम दूसरे ले आए। और नेबर्स हमको देखा करते थे, तो जैसे अगर उनको कोई ब्लैक काइट मिलती थी ले आते थे। हम उसको रख लिया करते थे या फिर हमको बता दिया करते थे। तो इस तरह से 1 2 3 4 करते करते ये सिलसिला स्टार्ट हुआ। एक चीज़ मैं और ऐड करना चाहूँगा इसमें, काइट लाने से पहले हम जैसे पिजन्स और दूसरे बर्ड्स को रेस्क्यू किया करते थे। तो एक बार हमें एक डव मिला, एक छोटा जुवेनाइल, उसको लेकर आए। उसको हमने बड़ा हुआ, फिर वो इवेंचुअली हमने उसको फ्लाइंग प्रैक्टिस के लिए, एक हमारे अंकल थे जो फ्लाइंग पिजन्स रखते थे, उनके एनक्लोजर में छोड़ा, वहाँ से फ्लाइंग प्रैक्टिस की। फिर उसके बाद उसको हमने वहीं से रिलीज़ किया। तो हर शाम को सनसेट से कोई 1 घंटा पहले वो आता था हमसे मिलने, डेली आता था। हम उसका वेट भी किया करते थे। एक दिन वो नहीं आया। हम मैं क्या कल आ जाएगा, नहीं आया। लगभग कोई 8-10 डेज तक वो नहीं आया। हम उसका वेट करते थे, लेकिन उसके बाद वो आया, एक और डव के साथ आया। और आकर मतलब बॉडी लैंग्वेज उसका ऐसा लग रहा था कि वो उसको इंट्रोड्यूस कराना चाहता है। और तो हमने आइडिया ये लगाया कि उसको फाइनली एक मेट मिल गया, उसको लाइफ में सेटल हो गया, और वो हमसे मिलवाने लाया कि लोगों मीट माई पेरेंट्स काइंड ऑफ थिंग। और उसके बाद वो कभी वापस नहीं आया। तो वी आर हैप्पी लाइक हैव बीन सेटल्ड इन द लाइफ एंड एवरीथिंग इज फाइन। एंड तो एक एक हमारे पास एक थोड़ा सा कॉन्फिडेंस पहले से था। जब हम काइट को लेके आए तो हमने कहा जैसे हमने डव को मैनेज किया, हम काइट को भी मैनेज कर सकते हैं। भाई ये है कि वो डाइट अलग है उसका बस। तो बस इसी तरीके से हमने उसके बाद फिर कुछ दिन के बाद हमें दूसरा काइट मिला, कुछ दिन के बाद तीसरा, उसके बाद फिर चौथा। तो एक काइंड ऑफ प्रोसेस स्टार्ट हुआ जिसमें हमारे पास कहाँ से बर्ड आते थे हमें भी नहीं पता। तो आज की डेट में हमारे पास 30,000 प्लस बर्ड्स आ चुके हैं, जिसमें मेनली बर्ड्स ऑफ प्रे हैं, काइट्स मेनली। और जैसे बोलते हैं ना, बूंद बूंद करके समुद्र बनता है, वो बनते हुए मैंने देखा है, फ्रॉम 1 bird to 30,000 birds.
So, you spoke about, your experience about picking up the first bird, and now you've cured so many birds. I was just wondering, related to what they eat, because that's what started this whole story. Is what when they're in your care, is there something specific? What is their diet like while they're with you? And over these 20 years that you've treated them, have you observed any changes in their diets so far?
Actually, mainly when we started it, we have seen people feeding them. Like in the film, you have seen that people go and specifically feed birds of prey, like mainly kites, and they basically give them like lungs or all this meat, which is not good for human consumption. So it is basically dumped on the garbage dumps. So people sometimes pick them up from the garbage, or sometimes they go and buy it from the butcher and they feed them. So when we started our center, we feed them lungs and sometimes liver and different parts of the animal. And then later on, when we have like, initially when we started it, it was very difficult for us to run the place because we have no money at all. Whatever we invested, it's from our own pocket, and we have a limited income. So when we start getting donations, and we shifted it to chicken, and chicken with bones. We mince them in a mincer, and we give like a whole chicken, you can say that. So there is a huge difference between their health. We have seen like there's a on the beak, on near the nostril, there's a part called tree, which is yellow in color. So if you have a well-fed, well-nurtured bird, that the tree will be yellow. And when the bird were with us, and we used to give them lungs and not so healthy food, it turns into whitish color. So we have seen like that if we change their diet, if we getting a complete balanced diet kind of thing, then their health can be seen by the color of the nostrils they have. So the diet is like very important, and like in Delhi, the most of the food which they get is from the dumping grounds where there are a lot of garbage is being dumped. So they don't have access to a healthy diet. So overall, if you see the health of a kite in Delhi, it's more like
they are just surviving on the bare minimum. So when the birds which ended up with us, they are much better fed, they have much better health, and we have an opening on our flight enclosure. When a bird is able to fly to a certain height, it can go out and they can come back whenever they want. So they love our chicken. All the time you will see them just flying back in, having free chicken, and then flying out. So it's a kind of a free food restaurant we have.
To that question, I just wanted to know, मतलब आप लोग diet का, how did you make a difference कि मतलब this diet has worked? Of course, over the years, there's experience, but also because at some point in the movie आप लोग village के मतलब गांव के birds के बारे में बात करते हो और शहर के birds के बारे में बात करते हो, तो आप लोगों का मतलब गांव के is there some experience related to the village that have you also experienced like kites from the village and you've learned from their diet, or have you learned from their food habits that you've sort of applied to the birds in the city?
If you the birds from the village, they are better fed. They have a healthier diet than the birds from the city. And we have seen like heavier birds when we pick them up, and we sometimes we weigh them, otherwise we not weigh every bird which we got. But whenever you pick them up, you will see there's a quite difference between their body mass. Sometimes we feel them more denser. It's more like a feeling of the sense of touch. It's not like any scientific method to measure them, how dense they are. But they look like khate pite karke hain. And the city birds are not like that. And if you go by, like we have seen like cigarette birds, which we also mentioned in the film. Initially, we thought that some of the neighbor who might have come to see the birds might be smoking and throwing cigarette birds inside the cage. And then when we locked all the access, we're still seeing there's cigarette birds. We thought that must be some of our employee. One person might be, and we even caught that person, and he was interrogating him, and he said, "No, I can't be smoking in just with the birds. I do smoke, I agree, but not in the enclosure." So then later on, we come to about like Dr. Man Barwa, we had there, and few other experts, and they said there is a study when people have approached the nest of birds of prey, they have seen cigarette birds inside their nest as well. And that is because to repel the insects inside their nest. So when we already have like open enclosure, so bird can go out and come in, so they can bring in cigarette birds with them. So, and to be honest, I have no idea that those nests which were studied by those scientists were countryside ones or city ones. So that is something which is expert opinion, and that is not my opinion, to be very honest. So we just incorporated it in the film because there's a free ka knowledge mil raha hai, to kya pura hai.
I had a follow-up question about diets and so on, and you talked about how you learned about the diets of the birds and what's good for them. So broadening that question a little bit, I was wondering how long, because in the movie they talk about how they show how you've learned to care medically for the birds, right? Fractures or like cuts, wounds. How long did it take you to master that, and how did you learn? Did you have a mentor or something?
अब बिगिनिंग में क्या हुआ, जैसे हमारे पास जो मैं फर्स्ट बर्ड की बात कर रहा हूँ जो इंजर्ड था, उसको फ्रैक्चर था और बोन के उसके 2 पीसेस हो चुके थे और विंग उसका हैंग कर रहा था। तो उस टाइम में हमको इतनी नॉलेज नहीं थी कि जैसे हम बर्ड तो ले आए, ठीक है, लाने के बाद फिर उसका करें क्या। सबसे बड़ा इशू था। खाना उसको दे सकते हैं, शेल्टर उसको दे सकते हैं, लेकिन उसका ट्रीटमेंट नहीं कर सकते। तो ट्रीटमेंट के लिए हम उसको एक वेटरनेरियन जो हमारे अंकल का डॉग देखने आते थे, हमने उनको भी दिखाया, और जो वेटरनरी हॉस्पिटल था जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा था जब हम बचपन में ले गए थे, वहाँ के वेटरनेरियन को भी दिखाया। तो उन्होंने यही बोला कि इसका कुछ नहीं हो सकता, बाकी जो ये लाइफ लॉन्ग फ्लाई नहीं करेगा। तो जैसे उसको तो फ्रैक्चर था, अब हमारे यहाँ काइट फ्लाइंग बहुत होती है, और काइट फ्लाइंग से बर्ड्स को विंग इंजरी होती है। और जो बर्ड्स का जो शेप होता है, वो एक तरह से आप अगर देखें तो हेड और उसका विंग को अगर देखें तो एक डब्ल्यू शेप बनता है, या डब्ल्यू शेप, या हम डब्ल्यू को उल्टा कर दें तो उसमें जैसे कि अगर कोई थ्रेड आकर उसके हेड से टकराता है तो वो स्लिप होकर उसके विंग में जाएगा, जहाँ उसका एल्बो जॉइंट होता है, वहाँ जाकर उसके कर्व बनता है, तो कर्व में जाकर वो एंड होता है, वहाँ से फिर वो विंग को काटता है। तो उस पार्ट को प्रोपोटेजियम बोलते हैं। तो जो 99% इंजरीज होती हैं वो इसी पार्ट में होती है। तो जैसे हमारे पास जो बर्ड्स आए तो उनको प्रोपोटेजियम इंजरी होती थी, और लगभग 50%, मोर देन 50% केसेस जो हमारे पास आते हैं वो कट वुंड वाले ही आते हैं। तो उसमें जब उनको कट होता था तो उसमें क्या है, उनकी टेंडन्स, स्किन, बोन्स, मसल्स, ये सब थ्रेड से कट जाते हैं। तो अगर तो जब उसकी मसल्स कट जाती हैं तो विंग मतलब वो अपना मूव नहीं कर सकती ठीक से। तो हम अगर उसको बर्ड को वाइल्ड में सरवाइव करना है तो उसकी फ़्लाइट परफेक्ट होनी चाहिए। अगर उसकी परफेक्ट फ़्लाइट नहीं है तो वो फ़्लाइट नहीं ले पाएगा, फ़्लाइट नहीं लेगा तो सरवाइव नहीं कर सकता। तो उसमें जब हम डॉक्टर्स को दिखाते थे तो उनको था कि वो कि इसको रिपेयर नहीं करा जा सकता, इसको हील किया जा सकता है लेकिन विंग को रिपेयर नहीं किया जा सकता। मतलब कि वूंड तो उसका हील अप हो जाएगा, लेकिन अगर रिपेयर नहीं होता, अगर उसकी बोन्स वापस से जो कट गई है वो रिकवर नहीं होती, या फिर उसकी जो मसल्स जो कट गई हैं उनको हम वापस से ठीक से सूचर नहीं कर सकते हैं, तो उनकी फंक्शनैलिटी वापस नहीं आएगी। अगर उनकी फंक्शनैलिटी वापस नहीं आएगी तो वो दोनों विंग सिमिलरली नहीं चला सकते। अगर दोनों विंग उनके सिमिलरली नहीं चलते तो वो परफेक्ट फ्लाइट उसकी नहीं हो सकती। अगर उसकी परफेक्ट फ्लाइट नहीं है तो वो सर्वाइव नहीं कर सकती। तो कई साल हमने ऐसे ही डॉक्टर्स को दिखाया, उन्होंने बोला कि भाई आप सिर्फ इनके जो स्टिचेस होंगे, लेकिन सिर्फ वुंड को जो खुला है उसकी स्किन सिर्फ बंद कर देंगे। तो ऐसे हमने 1-2 साल तक हमारा चलता रहा, वो करते रहे। कुछ उसमें जिनको बड़ी इंजरी नहीं होती थी वो फ्लाई बैक भी कर जाते थे और कुछ नहीं कर पाते थे। तो उसमें ये हम एक इस बीच एक हमारे पास ईगल आया, बूटेड ईगल था, जो उसको यही सेम इंजरी थी। तो उसके हमने जो ट्रीटमेंट जिस तरह से करते थे वो किया, और उसके बाद वो फ्लाई नहीं किया उसने। तो जहाँ से हमने उसको रेस्क्यू किया था, जो कॉलर थी, उनकी कॉल आती थी हमारे पास, वो पूछती थी कि बर्ड वो फ्लाई कब करेगा ताकि वापस आ सके, क्योंकि उसका एक मेट है जो डेली उसी स्पॉट पर आता है जहाँ से उन्होंने बर्ड को उठाया था, और वहाँ पर आकर वो कुछ साउंड करता है। वो मतलब उनको ऐसा लगता था कि वो बर्ड को ढूंढता है कि वो मेट उसका कहाँ पर है। और उसको हमने एक वेटरनरी हॉस्पिटल है वहाँ पर हमने उसको स्पेस की वजह से वहाँ रखवा दिया था। तो कुछ टाइम वो वहाँ रहा, और उसके कुछ टाइम के बाद उसकी डेथ हो गई। तो उससे हमको अटैचमेंट काफ़ी हो गया था बर्ड से, कि वो बर्ड अगर उसका सही प्रॉपर तरीके से ट्रीटमेंट होता, अगर उसका विंग सही से चलता, तो वो वापस फ्लाई कर जाता और अपने मेट के पास वापस चला जाता। तो मतलब हमको लगता था कि जो ट्रीटमेंट जिस तरह से हो रहा है उसमें कुछ कमी है। अगर कोई मसल्स या बोन्स अगर किसी इंसान की कट जाती, यहाँ तक कि अगर उसके एक लिम्ब का अगर पूरी तरह एम्पुटेशन ही हो जाए, तो उसको वापस से दोबारा से जोड़ा जा सकता है और उसको दोबारा से रिपेयर किया जा सकता है। अगर ऐसा इंसान में हो सकता है तो बर्ड में क्यों नहीं हो सकता? तो उसमें हमने फिर यही सोचा कि चलो इसमें अब जो नॉलेज जो वेटरनेरियंस हमको दे रहे हैं, उस नॉलेज को छोड़कर कुछ और इसके बारे में स्टडी की जाए। और कुछ और इस तरह से किया जाए कि जो जो ट्रीटमेंट का पार्ट हम मिस कर रहे हैं वो ट्रीटमेंट का पार्ट मिस ना हो और इनके विंग को ठीक से रिपेयर किया जाए। तो एक मैं आपको किस्सा बताऊं, ऐसे ही दरियागंज में बुक्स की मार्केट लगती थी संडे के संडे। तो उस टाइम ऐसे ही हम दरियागंज में बुक्स देख रहे थे, तो एक मुझको बुक मिली जो क्लिनिकल सर्जरी ह्यूमंस की थी। तो ऐसे ही देखते देखते मैंने बुक को खोला, तो उसमें मसल सूचर करने का तरीका मुझको बुक में दिखा। तो बुक को देखने के बाद मैंने उससे रेट पूछे, तो उसने मुझको शायद ऐसी कोई 500 या 600 वो बताया। मैंने कुछ उससे बार्गेनिंग की, तो बार्गेनिंग में बात हमारी बनी नहीं। मैंने बुक को रखा और नदीम थोड़ा आगे चले गए थे। तो मैंने नदीम से पूछा कि मैं इस रेट में ले लूँ इसको या ना लूँ। फिर जब तक हम वापस आए ना, वो बुक वहाँ नहीं थी। तो मतलब कि एक ऐसे ही छोटी छोटी चीज़ों से जो एक्सपीरियंस था, जैसे जैसे केसेस आते रहे, तो उस तरह से थोड़ी थोड़ी नॉलेज लेकर हम उस पर अप्लाई करते रहे।
मतलब जो बुक में हम उस टाइम सौ ने देखा, उन 2 मिनट में एक इस तरीके से मसल सुचर किया जाता है, वो समझ लिया आज भी हम इस्तेमाल
वो हम आज भी इस्तेमाल करते हैं। मतलब नॉलेज कहीं भी मिल जाए, कैसे भी मिल जाए।
लिटरली फिर बात वही मतलब।
तो फिर उसमें जैसे कुछ केसेस करते रहे, बाकी फिर एक हमारा थोड़ा वेटरनेरियन हमारे साथ भी थे, जो पार्ट टाइम हमारे साथ में थे। मतलब साथ में हम लोगों ने कर कर जैसे भी, तो हम देखते रहे, ये करते रहे। तो जो मसल सूचर्स हम परफेक्टली उनके कर ये लगभग अगर मैं बताऊं आपको, तो जो केसेस हमारे पास आते हैं अब, तो उसमें जिनकी हम सर्जरी अटेम्प्ट करते हैं, क्योंकि काफ़ी केसेस ऐसे आते हैं जो काफ़ी लेट हो जाते हैं और उनका कुछ नहीं हो सकता। तो जो सर्जरीज हम अटेम्प्ट करते हैं उसमें से लगभग हमारा 80% सक्सेस रेट है।
तो उसको मैं अब 2015 में पहली बार यूएस गया था, एक कॉन्फ्रेंस था वहाँ वाइल्ड लाइफ का, मुझे स्कॉलरशिप मिला था उसे अटेंड करने का। तो आई वॉज वेरी होपफुल दैट इफ आई एम गोइंग टू यूएस आई विल बी लर्निंग अ लॉट फ्रॉम वेटरनेरियंस इन यूएस and I can like know how they fix the wings. And when I was very surprised that they do not know how to do it. Like they have the same explanation what veterinarians in India have it. Like the muscles of a bird is very fine, you cannot repair them. And we were very like I was very surprised that we are doing it already. And it is very much possible to suture those fine muscles back into their place. And they were surprised, like how you do it and what, how. And please do let us know how you do it. So after 3 years, we were back on the same conference, and that time we were presenting our surgical techniques, like what the protocols we have developed and everything. And people were like so surprised that half of them were in disbelief that that is not even possible, what the thing we're talking about. But half of them were like, wow, amazing. Thank you for telling us. And we even get like mails from surgeons from US and Canada. We have like this bird which having this issue, that what do you suggest? So we still like sometimes we do some consultation with them, and we are still working on it, and we are doing further research, and we are preparing another protocol and another presentation to be like most probably next year. We'll be having another presentation back in that same wildlife conference in US.
You have a question first? Okay, go ahead.
सो ऐसे बहुत सारी पॉइंट्स आते हैं फिल्म में जहाँ आप लोग ह्यूमन इंसान के शरीर को और जानवरों के शरीर के बारे में एक साथ सोचते हैं. I think that was very very inspiring for me to like think about as a researcher. But generally asking, has working with birds sort of changed the way you relate to other living things, be it humans or animals, or and also especially because kites, like आप जैसे आपने बोला birds of prey है, तो caregiving to kites, it'll be a little different from caregiving to other animals, I believe. So if you want to address that.
Yeah, like back in 2010, so we have like two phases of our hospital. One was in Old Delhi when we started it in our Old Delhi house. That is from 2003 to 2013. And from 2013, we shifted it to Wazirabad, in north part of Delhi. So when we were there in Old Delhi, we had a very small house. And when we have like baby birds coming in, we used to keep them inside my bedroom. And like in the daytime, there's hawks and baby kites were flying around. And in the night, the owls fly around in my room. And so it was quite an experience. And so there's a particular species called spotted owlet. It's a very small bird, and they're super intelligent. So one of them, like that time, I was not that good in making a distance. Like we keep a distance from wild animals, so they do not get imprinted. Like they do not think that either they are human beings or we are birds. So we draw a line. So that time I was like very early stage of it, so I couldn't like prevented it from being imprinted to me. So that spotted owlet used to think that that bird is a human. So we like live in the same room. And sometimes like one particular day, it was like peeking out of a window and like we're living so close to each other that we know like body language of each other. So that bird called me, come here. So I went to that owl and he showed me, look outside, there's a kite just sitting next to the window and it's a dangerous bird. So let's both of us hide somewhere. And I said, what? I'm not a little owlet. And it was, no, let's hide somewhere. And I said, I'll just shoo it away. So sometimes you come so close to them that you really get kind of imprinted in a different direction. Like you think you are an owl and not a human being. And the emotions, like the intelligence they have is just like what we human have. It's nothing like a big difference between them. Like the emotions which I have seen in them, it was just, I can't like make difference between a human and a bird. They are so much similar. And that is not like something which I read somewhere or some other, it's my own experience. And we don't encourage ourselves to imprint any wild animals. Otherwise, it has no use in the wild. Like you can't release them or they will be just like dying somewhere. So that was my very last experience of owl and human interaction as a family. And after that, I never had, but I had another barn owl. It was like a very, very old female. It has a kind of paralyzed to its body. I don't know why it had it, but it stayed us for a very long time. Can't even stand on its feet. So every evening, I used to take her out in my arms, going around the rooftop, and just like the birds, they perch on a particular point and they look down. So I just like used to tell her that look down. I just standing side up wall, and then after a few minutes move to some other point, and again let's look around here. It's like you take your dog out for a walk. So that bird was so handicapped, it can't move around. So I had like a very good connection with it. It has no future in the wild because it's very old, and I don't think that it will survive. So I have that thing like I do not have to imprint it. That was not the concern. So when I have like a half an hour walk with that owl, so it looks like that I am like dealing with some other human being, someone from my family, or someone like some human need a help of mine, and I'm just taking care of that person. So when you are so close to them, so my experiences with birds, and not with mammals. But mammals are far more intelligent, far more emotional. So obviously they have more touch to them. And I say that there's no difference between a human and a bird. So you can have an idea how much different between a mammal and a human have.
So I was just wondering, considering, say, the climate has been changing rapidly, right? The summers are hotter, the winters are colder. Do you think, or have you noticed any change in, say, the migratory patterns of birds, or do you think the heat affects birds? And are you noticing any of this?
Yes, so we've seen like kites, they breed in spring. So they're changing their breeding patterns now. They are breeding a bit earlier. Like we have some like exceptional cases when you have birds coming in, like baby birds coming in December, and but not in a good number. But now there's a number of them keep on increasing every year. They are shifting towards winter, and the summer of 2022 was very hot. It was a very exceptional hot summer we had that year. And on an average, we get about 800 juveniles and baby birds every year at that summertime. But that in the year 22, we got 1,200. And it was because of sudden spell of heat. And 99% of them were dehydrated. And when walking on the streets, I have seen a lot of dead birds. Highest ever I have ever saw the dead bodies on the street or that particular summer. So definitely they are affected by it. And I think most probably they have a long-term effect, like in their breeding patterns, and might be like migratory as well. But I don't think there's any study I know of. But as an observer, I see that there's small changes coming, but they are gradually keep on increasing. Anything you would like to add?
कि कैटरैक्ट है और मैं सोच रही थी कि अगर बर्ड ऑफ प्रे है, बर्ड ऑफ प्रे के लिए तो उनकी मतलब देखना दूर से अपने प्रे को पकड़ना, उसके लिए तेज आंखें होना कितना जरूरी है। लेकिन आपने बताया कि बर्ड्स को बड़ी छोटी उम्र में अब कैटरैक्ट हो रहे हैं, तो आपको क्या लगता है जैसे कि ये क्लाइमेट की बात है कि डाइट की बात है कि क्या हवा खराब हो गई है कि मतलब हो क्या रहा है हमारी ये बर्ड्स के लिए तो हवा पानी की तरह है। आपके फिल्म की शुरुआत में आप कहते हैं ना कि चील जो है हवा में तैरती है, तो क्या वातावरण में क्या बदला है, आपको क्या लगता है?
कुछ मैं पहले टांग अड़ाना चाहूँगा। मैं अभी कॉन्फ्रेंस में था, तो वहाँ पर अभी की नया टॉपिक चल रहा था कि जुवेनाइल्स के अंदर कैटरैक्ट एक नया फिनोमिना दिखने को मिल रहा है, जो मतलब यूएस में भी देखा। तो उसमें मैं जो डॉक्टर जिन्होंने प्रेजेंटेशन दिया था उनसे डिस्कस कर रहा था, तो वो बोल रहे थे कि इसका या तो कई बार होता है बचपन में कोई चोट लगना आँख में, या फिर डाइट भी हो सकती है, और कुछ ऐसे रीजंस हैं जो खुद अभी स्टडी होने बाकी हैं। तो एक ये मतलब जो नंबर वहाँ है वो तो बहुत कम है। अब मैंने उनसे डिस्कस किया जो मेरे यहाँ नंबर आते हैं, तो वो दे वर वेरी सरप्राइज कि तो आपके पास तो इतने सारे कैटरैक्ट कैसे आ रहे हैं इतनी कम एज में। जो हमारे पास माइग्रेटरी बर्ड्स हैं कुछ जिनको कैटरैक्ट है, उनको हम कुछ नहीं कर पाते क्योंकि उनका यूएस में तो हो जाता है सर्जरी, लेकिन इंडिया में भी वेटरनरी साइंस इतना डेवलप नहीं है जो कैटरैक्ट का सर्जरी हो सके यहाँ पर। तो हम सोचते हैं किसी दिन जब वो टेक्निक आएगा तब उनको इलाज मिलेगा, तब वो अपने वापस देश जा सकते हैं। तो जब तक के लिए हम होपफुल हैं कुछ आता है। बस ये है कि जितना भी वेटरनरी साइंस कह लें या स्टडी ऑफ वाइल्ड एनिमल्स, वाइल्ड बर्ड्स कह लें, इंडिया बहुत पीछे है। हमें बहुत कुछ स्टडी करना है, और जितना हमारे पास नंबर्स आते हैं, हमारे पास अराउंड 3,300 बर्ड्स आते हैं एवरी ईयर, जिसमें 95% बर्ड्स उपरे होते हैं। तो अगर हम नंबर्स की बात करें तो वर्ल्ड का सबसे बड़ा रेस्क्यू सेंटर है हमारा, जो इतने छोटे जगह पर है, जो आपने देखा ही है। तो हमारे पास जितने केसेस आ रहे हैं, तो हम एक काइंड ऑफ रिसर्च हब हो सकते हैं वर्ल्ड का, जो हमारे यहाँ, जैसे हमने पटेजियम इंजरी पर रिसर्च किया, ऐसे बहुत कुछ है जो इंडिया में हो रहा है। एक बहुत कॉमन सी चीज़ है जिसको हम सेप्टिसीमिया बोलते हैं, उनके लिम्स में एक बैक्टीरियल इन्फेक्शन होता है जो यूनिक है इंडिया के लिए। अब वो क्यों है, उसके लिए भी स्टडी चाहिए हमें। हाँ, बस नंबर कितने आते होंगे उस
सेप्टिसीमिया अराउंड
200 एवरी ईयर।
200।
200 सेप्टिसीमिया केसेस एवरी ईयर आते हैं उसमें। और वो, जब मैं दूसरे कंट्रीज के वेटरनेरियन से डिस्कस करता हूँ, दे हैव नो आइडिया वो क्या चीज़ है। वो इट इज़ सो यूनिक टू इंडिया। तो एक ऐसी चीज़ है हमारे पास जो हम काफ़ी कुछ सीख सकते हैं। और अगर हम परवाह भी ना करें ब्लैक काइट्स की, दे आर सो मैनी ऑफ देम, दे आर नॉट इवन एंडेंजर्ड। लेकिन उनसे जो सीखा हुआ नॉलेज है, अगर हम वो एंडेंजर्ड स्पीशीज़ पर लगाएं, तो हम कितना बड़ा डिफरेंस ला सकते हैं। जैसे सेप्टिसीमिया अगर किसी को हो जाता है यूएस में, उनको कोई आइडिया नहीं होगा, बर्ड की डेथ भी हो जाएगी। या अगर पटेजियम इंजरी हो जाती है, उनको फिक्स करना नहीं आता। अब कोई भी ऐसा कोई यूनिक बर्ड हो, कोई मतलब यूनिक इन द सेंस लाइक हाईली एंडेंजर्ड बर्ड हो, जैसे मैंने आपसे उस दिन एग्जाम्पल भी लिया था कॉन्डोर का। अगर ऐसे बर्ड को कोई इंजरी हो जाती है जिसको हम फिक्स कर सकते हो, और वहाँ पर नॉलेज नहीं हो, तो हम वो नॉलेज शेयर करना चाहेंगे सबसे। हम चाहते हैं कि जो भी हम सीख रहे हैं वो वर्ल्ड में काम आए किसी बर्ड के, क्योंकि हमारा मकसद ही बर्ड्स को बचाना है। तो अभी हम इसी कोशिश में लगे हैं कि जो जो हम यहाँ पर कर रहे हैं और क्या क्या हम और कर सकते हैं, उसके लिए हम जैसे भी मैन पावर या फंड्स जो ज़रूरत है, उसी में हम लगे हैं, ताकि आगे हम वर्ल्ड के बर्ड्स के लिए कर सकें, ना कि सिर्फ दिल्ली के बर्ड्स के लिए।
लेकिन आप चीलों पे काम करते हैं, और दिल्ली में चीलों की पूरी संख्या बढ़ी है, क्योंकि वल्चर्स, इस फिल्म में आप बताते हैं कि वल्चर्स का जो इकोलॉजिकल निश था वो अब चीलों ने ले लिया। तो आपके काम से वल्चर्स की पॉपुलेशन को वापस, अगर वापस लौटेगी वो पॉपुलेशन, तो शायद आपके काम की वजह से भी हो पाएगा ना।
15 साल में एक वल्चर दिखा दिल्ली में, ये बात होगी कोई 5-6 साल पहले की।
लेकिन आपके पास तो अच्छे
2070 दैट इज समथिंग एल्स, लाइक वो एंडेंजर्ड नहीं है इतने। हम बात कर रहे हैं ग्रिफिन्स और जो लॉन्ग नेक बिग
जिप्स फैमिली।
तो उसमें क्या हुआ, दिल्ली एयरपोर्ट पर है कि हमें कॉल आया कि एक वल्चर है, और लोग कई बार काइट्स को बोलते हैं वल्चर, तो हमने कहा काइट ही होगा। तो हमने किसी को भेजा वहाँ रेस्क्यू करने के लिए। एक फॉरेस्ट एरिया, बिल्कुल वुडेड एरिया था, जहाँ से हमने उसको निकाला
था जब T3 का काम चल रहा था।
तो उसमें हमें गिल गाय वाला केस था। तो ये दूसरा था जब T3 फंक्शनल था, तो उसी के पास ही बर्ड मिला। तो उसका विंग कटा हुआ था मांझे से, और काफ़ी गहरा वुंड था। और जिसको मिला था उसे काफ़ी लेट मिला था, आई थिंक 10 डेज हो गए होंगे उसको, क्योंकि जिस तरीके से हमने उसका बॉडी मास देखा, जितना उसका था, वो बहुत हाईली इमिसिएटेड था। उसने बहुत दिनों से कुछ नहीं खाया पिया था। तो जब तक हमारे हॉस्पिटल पहुंचा, जब तक उसकी डेथ हो गई थी। तो अगर कोई बर्ड जो 15 साल में एक बार दिखाई दिया, वो भी इस कंडीशन में कि उसको पतंग की डोर से वो सरवाइव नहीं कर पाया, और अगर वो हेल्दी होता तो डेफिनेटली वी कैन फिक्स इट। वो एक ही एक बड़ा उसी स्पीशी पर होता है जो ऑलरेडी हाईली एंडेंजर्ड है इंडिया में। तो नॉलेज तो ऐसी चीज़ है जो आप कहीं भी यूज़ कर सकते हैं उसको। बस हम जहाँ मिल जाती है, जैसे मिल जाती है, हम उठा लेते हैं। और जिसको पास पहुँचाना है तो आप बताइए, हम वी आर रेडी टू डू इट।
So I had a couple of questions about the film itself. When you watched the film, did you think that something got left out, that something you would like to add to the film? Did it not show some important part of the work that you do?
Actually, it was like they shot the film for 3 years. Like they come to us in the morning, like five days a week. And they stay with us like sometimes 9, 10, sometimes even 2 a.m. So they have like, and they told us they have 450 hours of usable footage with them. So when I was talking to director, he said that out of 450 hours, they have to make a final cut of 1.5 hours. And he said that that is the most difficult thing he has to do. Like he used a term called killing your darlings. Like that particular scene is so dear to him. Like 5 scenes are so dear to him, but the editor cut out like 4. And he said, what are you doing? And the editor actually didn't invited him for when she was doing the edit. So the film was edited in Denmark, and our director was still in Delhi, and he was not invited. So at last 10 days, when the final cut was ready, then only he was allowed into the studio. So they have like, they know that the director is emotionally attached to some scenes, which he has like worked very hard on it, or he thinks this very important for the film, but editor doesn't think like that. So they have like, this is important, this is not important. It must be important in the eye of the director, but not for the film. So like, so we have like so many scenes when we saw the final cut and we said, what about that one? And what about that one? He said, don't ask me. I am already crying because of so many darlings of mine are not there at all. So it is a very difficult question, and it's more up to the editor to do it. So we even forgot how many, like they were shooting us all throughout the day for 3 years. So you know that, but you can have an idea like what all must be there, which we wanted them to be in the film, and it is not. So we can't comment on, like, it's something which the director has no control over it. So how can we?
Like there was a scene when the all the birds were lying there on the terrace, and I was going there to bury them. So वहाँ का एक सीन था, वो उसमें काफ़ी मेहनत की थी उन्होंने कि मैं जब बर्ड्स को लेकर जा रहा हूँ और एक वहाँ मैं डिग कर रहा हूँ, और फिर डिग करने के बाद मैं जब वापस आ रहा था सालिक के साथ, तो उसमें कुछ भी नहीं है। बस उसमें सीन में उन्होंने दिखाया कि मैं एक वो जिसको फावड़ा बोलते हैं वो लेकर मैं लैंड को डिग कर रहा हूँ बस। लेकिन उस सीन में उन्होंने आई थिंक 4-5 आवर्स लगा दिए थे सिर्फ वो सीन को शूट करने में, कि मैं किस तरह से जा रहा हूँ और किस तरह से, मतलब जो जो मेरे इमोशंस थे उस टाइम, मुझको काफ़ी गुस्सा आ रहा था और सालिक मेरे साथ था। तो वो बताते थे उस टाइम, यहाँ जो एक ये वेन होती है, वो मेरी काफ़ी, मतलब इस तरह से पल्स के साथ वो कर रही थी, और वो सीन में जो उन्होंने शूट किया था उसमें बहुत अच्छे से आई थी, मतलब सीन बहुत अच्छा था और उसमें बहुत मेहनत की थी उन्होंने, तो वो सीन भी उसमें नहीं है।
हेलो, ओके। आई होप उन सारी फुटेजेस से हमें एक सीक्वल भी मिल जाएगी अब। मेरा सवाल इज अगेन फिल्म से रिलेटेड, लेकिन आप लोगों के रिलेशन, मतलब बर्ड्स के साथ रिलेशनशिप्स से भी रिलेटेड है। व्हेन द फिल्म बिगिंस, आई बिलीव इट वाज आप नदीम भाई थे जो बोल रहे थे कि सेविंग काइट्स विल गिव यू सवाब। तो आई थिंक जो फिल्म में था वो ट्रांसलेट किया गया था एज रिलीजियस क्रेडिट उसमें नीचे। और दूसरी अनदर सीन वेयर आप लोग बोल रहे थे कि your relationship with the bird started from your childhood stories of moral stories and religious stories that your mothers told you about. So would you want to like give us some of those stories and how maybe the social and religious significance of the kite for you, for your family, neighbors, community?
एक स्टोरी है, मैं बताता हूँ आपको। मैं छोटा था तो उस टाइम में वल्चर्स हुआ करते थे। तो हमारे जो टेरेस है उसके साथ में एक ऊंची छत थी जहाँ वल्चर जाकर बैठा करते थे। तो उस टाइम छोटा था मैं, तो हमको शौक था कि अगर कोई ऐसा वल्चर कोई मिल जाए जिसको मैं पाल लूँ। तो उस टाइम में तो पॉसिबल नहीं था, मतलब कुछ नहीं रख सकते थे। तो एक बार छत पर एक काइट आकर बैठी, और जब मैं छत पर गया तो वो उड़कर भागी। एक उसका फैदर गिर गया था उसकी बॉडी से, तो मैं उसका फैदर उठा कर ले आया। तो अम, मैं शायद स्कूल से वापस आया था जब, तो वो फैदर लाकर, जब मैं फैदर लेकर आया तो मेरे फादर थे। तो उन्होंने फैदर को देखा, वहाँ मुझसे पूछे कि ये क्यों लाया है तू। आपको मैं बताऊं, जो बर्ड्स ऑफ प्रे हैं वो कंसीडर करे जाते हैं एज अ बैड लक कैरियर। ये जिनको लोग बोलते हैं कि ये मनहूस हैं, अगर ये आपके घर पर आते हैं या आपके पास आते हैं तो ये कोई बैड लक लेकर आएंगे। तो उस टाइम में मैंने अपने फादर को दिखाया, तो उन्होंने मुझसे पूछा कि ये क्यों लेकर आया है। मैंने कहा मुझे अच्छा लगता है, मैं इसको रखूँगा अपने पास। तो उस टाइम मुझको नींद आ रही थी, तो फैदर को मैं अपने पिलो के नीचे रखकर सो गया। तो जब मैं सोकर उठा तो मेरे पिलो के नीचे फैदर नहीं था। तो मुझे काफ़ी अफसोस हुआ। मैंने अपने फादर से पूछा भी तो उन्होंने मुझे कुछ नहीं बताया।
तो बहुत एक आइडिया है कि अगर कोई हम मतलब हमारी इंडियन सोसाइटी में काफ़ी इस चीज़ को माना जाता है, और कई बार ऐसा होता है कि जैसे हमें फ़ोन कॉल आते हैं, ज़्यादातर लोग उल्लुओं से बहुत डरते हैं। अगर वो आपके घर में हैं या आपके छत पर बैठे हैं तो कुछ गड़बड़ होने वाला है। तो ऐसे केस में लोगों का पैनिक होते हैं, तब कॉल करते हैं। एक कॉल आया कि आप मेरे घर के बाहर उल्लू बैठा है, उसे आप पकड़ कर ले जाओ। क्योंकि जब ऑलरेडी आपके घर के बाहर है, आपको दिक्कत क्या है? कहते नहीं, मुझे 1 महीने से दिखाई दे रहा है। जिस दिन दिखाई दिया तो मेरा जॉब चला गया नेक्स्ट डे, जब मैंने उसे फर्स्ट टाइम देखा। मैंने कोई बात नहीं, कोइंसिडेंस। यार उसके 10 दिन के बाद मेरे ब्रदर को इतना बड़ा लॉस हुआ बिजनेस में, उसका बिजनेस बंद हो गया। मैं क्या, अनदर कोइंसिडेंस। कोई बात नहीं, मेरा कल फ्रैक्चर हो गया पैर, अब तो आप ले जाइए उसको। ऐसे अलग अलग लोगों का मानना होता है, इसलिए उस हिसाब से स्टोरीज बनते हैं हमारे, जिनका कोई सर पैर नहीं होता, लेकिन फिर भी स्टोरीज इंटरेस्टिंग होते हैं, चलते हैं। और सवाब जो वर्ड है उसे बोलते हैं पुण्य, लेकिन इंग्लिश में ऐसा कोई वर्ड ही नहीं है। सिन है लेकिन पुण्य नहीं है। तो ये एक बहुत डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन था जो डायरेक्टर ने हमसे पूछा था, इसका इंग्लिश वर्ड क्या है। मैं क्या, वी हैव नो आइडिया, आप करो। तो उन्होंने रिलीजियस क्रेडिट डाल दिया। आई थिंक इज अ वेरी डम आइडिया टू राइट इज एज अ रिलीजियस क्रेडिट, जिसका आई थिंक वेस्टर्न सोसाइटीज में भी कोई एग्जिस्टेंस नहीं होता। तो बस जी, क्वेश्चन
बाकी
फ्रॉम द पब्लिक।
नहीं, वो था अ, जैसे कि काइट्स को जो हमारा इंडिया में कल्चर है, जो मेनली मुस्लिम्स जो काफ़ी टाइम से फॉलो कर रहे हैं, वो काइट्स को मीट खिलाते हैं। जैसे जो लंग्स की बात कर रहे थे, लंग्स उनको मीट टॉस करते हैं, और वो मिड एयर ग्रैब करते हैं, उसको ले जाते हैं। तो उसको वो माना जाता है कि उसको एक वर्ड होता है उर्दू में सदका। सदका होता है कि कोई चैरिटी चैरिटी करना। तो उसमें जैसे कि अगर हम चैरिटी करते हैं तो उसमें मानते हैं कि हमको उससे सवाब मिलता है। और जैसे सवाब मिलता है मतलब कि हमारे जो सिंस हैं वो उनसे ज़्यादा जो पुण्य है वो बढ़ रहा है।
अच्छा, दूसरी बात, उसमें जब सदका करते हैं तो उसमें एक चीज़ और होती है कि वो आपकी कोई जो बुरी चीज़ आपकी तरफ आ रही है उसको रोकता है। जैसे फिल्म में डायलॉग यूज़ किया, वो आपकी डिफिकल्टीज को कंज्यूम कर लेते हैं। तो इस टाइप का जो सदका होता है, मेनली वो होता है पुण्य के लिए कम होता है, लेकिन मुसीबत आने को बचाने के लिए ज़्यादा होता है। और फिल्म का जो डायलॉग आप रेफर कर रहे हैं वो चील बचाने के लिए नहीं, चील को खाना खिलाने के लिए है। तो उसका आइडिया यह है कि किसी भी भूखे जानवर को या इंसान को खाना देंगे तो उसके में पुण्य मिलता है उसको, और इंडिया में बहुत प्रेवलेंट है।
So, with this thought of charity, of punya, earning through good deeds towards other creatures who are weaker, than ourselves. I'd like to end because we're out of time. Questions के लिए time इस सेशन में नहीं है, लेकिन informally हम बातचीत जरूर हाँ, but we will, I think we have to cut this session short. तो आप दोनों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया कि आप इतनी दूर से आए और ट्रैफिक को जूझते हुए.
अच्छा लगा आपने हमें बुलाया.
और all the best to your work. I know for me, you're heroes, not just heroes on film, but heroes in real life. And I'm sure you've inspired, your work has inspired many, many people and will inspire our students also. Thank you so much. And thank you to Aman and Manasi and Abhishruti also for leading the discussion. And thanks everyone who is listening and watching. And we will continue our conversation offline. Good night.